Couple of these.
Like your tie. Yes, I saw that. Recording's good. Okay, welcome everyone to our. There it goes. There we go. Okay, welcome everyone to our February 27th, 2023 strategic planning meeting. It is 9:02, but the record reflects that all 5 commissioners are present. Mr. Simmons on Zoom, and we've got our executive management team here in the room. So we're going to start with Mike Burgess, our county lobbyist. So Mike, I'll let you take it away.
Morning, commissioners. Hope you're all doing well. I always start these with just kind of a general update on where we're at. We're almost halfway through session. Big milestone last Friday. That was the fiscal committee cutoff. So, the universe of bills that are moving has been shrunk considerably. We'll spend now the next 10 days or so till the next cutoff on both the House and Senate floor, almost exclusively passing bills. Not all of them have to have a fiscal impact, but for the most part, all the policy bills and fiscal bills have to pass before that cutoff to remain alive. Then we'll go through this entire process again in the opposite bodies. So Senate bills will be going through the House committees, House bills through the Senate committees. Expect to see the budgets probably the week of the 22nd. I think the next revenue forecast for the state's the 22nd. And that's when or it's in that time frame. And that's when the budgets usually show up a couple of days after that. So that's another big event on the way. 3 bills I wanted to talk with you all about that are not new to you today, but get some more clear direction on what the county's position, what we want it to be on these bills. The recycling bill, the bill with competency evaluations and apprenticeships. On the recycling bill, I wrote a brief narrative that trying to, encapsulate some of the problems I've heard with the bill, some of the concerns I've had or I've heard. I think you have Lindsay there from your solid waste division, I hope, to answer some of the more technical questions. Okay. So just some background, commissioners. I mean, it is a huge, huge bill. It's almost 4 bills in one. And not every piece directly impacts the county. Some of the underlying themes I've heard from the county perspective is, and Commissioner French in particular, you've raised concerns about this bill the last 3 weeks, and I think Commissioner Kearns, you might have as well, 3 weeks ago. It's just how this impacts the current system that you have in Spokane, the prospect of increased costs, both on your citizenry and then additionally on the county. And on the narrative I wrote, I tried to separate those two things because I think in some ways they're 2 different questions. Obviously as elected officials, you have the right to relay the concerns of your constituents, but then I think you all have exhibited that you have the responsibility to run the county as well. So I kind of tried to split that into two discussion points. A lot of the questions about the bill in terms of cost to the county are unknown. It depends on who you talk to. And I've talked to a lot of folks over the last week about this bill when you all indicated you want to have a further discussion about it today. There's probably good and bad for the county in it. But I think one of the underlying themes, and you'll see that in the narrative I wrote, was there's just a lot of unknowns about it. Proponents will point to cost savings. I think they're perfectly grounded in their argument they make. But then on the flip side of that, I think it's perfectly normal to question some of the projections they might make in terms of cost savings for both citizens and the county. So if you want to flip to the doc, what I wrote, and then obviously I don't want to put Lindsay on the spot here, but if she's was involved in some email traffic, so she's seen what I had written too. But commissioners want to give you, if we can have a dialogue about it, and then at the end of the day, I need to know, like, what do we want your message that I carry forward to your delegation and other legislators to be. So does that all make sense, or do you have any questions? Oh, one last thing. It will be the House bill. The Senate version did not make it out of the Ways and Means Committee. So the House version is on moving its way to the House floor calendar.
I know, Lindsay, yeah, I'll let you speak to it first.
Okay, yeah, as Mike said, it's a large bill. The current substitute House bill is 130 something pages, so it's very complex. There are a lot of unknowns, and I know I'm basically reiterating what Mike said, but it's a very complex, big bill. And if I try and put this in context, and I'm speaking about the county operations, so the county administers the regional solid waste system, and we run 2 transfer stations. And so if I put this in context, our recycling program probably represents about 3 to 4% of our total budget to administer the system. So yes, this is a big complex bill, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not touching the same thing as like a disposal rate increase or something like that. So there are, as Mike said, there are drawbacks and benefits to this bill. And when Deb and I look through these, they actually almost come out as a wash, to be honest with you, when we're talking about our transfer station operations. So some of the drawbacks are that if this bill comes into play, the deposit return system will essentially mean that people will hang on to their aluminum cans, right? So that is a very profitable market commodity for recycling that is collected at our transfer stations as well as in curbside. When that happens, that would be a loss of revenue at our transfer stations. And also, and this would impact the haulers too, the Smart Center where we take most of our recyclables would likely increase their costs or what they would charge us to drop off recycling, because the commodity mix is no longer going to contain those most valuable aluminum cans. So the price that they pay to process paper, cardboard, the other things, plastic, would increase. The flip side of that is that on the transfer station side, we would be taking less loads to the Smart Center. And it wouldn't include glass, which is really heavy. So again, it's kind of a wash. So the Smart Center prices would go up, but we wouldn't be transporting and paying the Smart Center as much because we're not transporting that many tons. There is another proviso in this bill that there's a revenue loss fund that local governments can apply to. So for the first 5 years. So any loss of revenue that we have for aluminum cans, we could actually apply to the PRO in this act, who would reimburse us for that loss of revenue. So it would give us 5 years to find a replacement for that revenue stream. The other piece is that our education and outreach expenses in this act can be reimbursed by the PRO and the DRO, which is the 2 organizations that would be set up to manage the program. Right now, we rely on LaSWIFA funds. So LaSWIFA is Local Solid Waste Financial Assistance. That grant covers a lot of our recycling, education, and outreach. So really, it's transitioning from one source of funding to another. The caveat is, again, we go back to the idea of there's a lot of unknowns. The bill says that, yes, we can be reimbursed for advertisement, social media, some of these easy education outreach things. It doesn't stipulate, does this involve reimbursement for classroom workshops or cart tagging, some of the more labor-heavy things that we do as a part of the regional solid waste system to make sure that we're educating our community. So again, that's an unknown. Some of the costs will be reimbursed, some of them may not be. That's really about it. So, our solid waste section, we don't find any significant impact from this bill. If it passes, we'll likely opt in. If it doesn't, we would just continue to operate as is. That's my report.
So as you described the impacts to the system, but what I've expressed over the last couple of weeks is the impact to the ratepayer. Because the ratepayer is going to see an increase in cost for commodities that they're purchasing now, which is going to exacerbate an inflationary environment that we're already suffering from. Would you disagree with that statement?
I think it depends on your ratepayer, if I'm honest. So I do think Mike points out in his write-up that for our most vulnerable communities, they will see an increase because right now, as ratepayers pay for their services, they pay for recycling service. That curbside recycling service will now be paid for by the pro under this act. However, they will then be paying a price increase on all the products that they buy that have packaging around them. So instead of paying for that in their garbage bill, they're going to be paying for that at the cash register at the grocery store. And that may increase their cost of living. So for the most vulnerable communities, yes, that is a concern. There's another flip side to that, it depends on the population. We have a number of people that call into our office every year wanting curbside recycling, but they're outside of our minimum service level area. And so they have to petition to us to see if there's housing density, and then we work with the hauler to modify the boundary, and it's a very complex, time-consuming process. In the end, they just want curbside recycling and they can't get it. So for that community who wants it but they can't have it, they have been willing to pay for recycling service if they can get it. So I think there are differences in the populations that we see in Spokane County.
So,
I was gonna ask Mike something, follow up.
so what I'm trying to figure out is what is in Spokane County, because it seems like, my feelings is that we've been doing it well for a long time. So yes, there's trade-offs, but based on where we're at today and what we're doing, what is it really going to change and do? I mean, to me, it's going to make it more complicated, and not as easy as what it is right now for us as the county operators, or as citizens. I don't know. I mean, it's going to make it more difficult for citizens because now they've got to take their, pop cans to the store to get reimbursed. They're going to pay more on the front end. All of those things. So that's one thing that it's going to be changing. But for us as county operations, when we are doing a lot of the things really well, what is it going to be doing?
Yeah, great question. At our transfer stations, we already offer free recycling. People can opt out of curbside, and they do, and they bring us their garbage and they bring us their recycling. And we still see people dropping recyclables off on the tipping floor, even though recycling is free. I'm hesitant to say that a system change like this is going to change the behavior of people coming to our transfer stations. If they are coming to our transfer stations for their garbage and recycling, it's not going to change their behavior, one way or the other. I think you bring up a good point that, yeah, it will be more complicated for people to go somewhere else to drop off their cans. There is an option in the act to where we could cite at our transfer stations a bottle deposit infrastructure. Again, we don't know what the costs are going to be. It's another big unknown in the act. So again, I think there are pros and cons, but citizen and resident behaviors probably will not change significantly just because the system is changed.
Could I do a follow-up? Hi, Amber Waldron, New County Commissioner.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So because I'm new, can you explore further for me what you were talking about when folks want to have recycling service, but they're kind of out of an area where the haulers, it's not easy for them to get there, right? Maybe it's not cost efficient. So what is the system right now? How would that change with this bill?
Sure,
So right now you have to have a certain number of people in a certain area
right.
for them to get the recycling service.
Correct. So right now we have what's called a minimum service level boundary, and it loosely follows the urban growth boundary. Within that boundary, if you subscribe to curbside garbage, you also mandatorily subscribe to curbside recycling. If you are outside of that boundary, the haulers do not have to provide you curbside recycling if you subscribe to curbside garbage. So we have residents that call in who are outside of the boundary who say, hey, I really want curbside recycling, but I called the hauler and they said, we don't provide that service because there's not housing density. So then we go through a process where the resident has to sign a petition and get neighbors to say, yes, we also will subscribe if you provide the service.
So how would this bill change that?
It basically would eliminate that boundary. And so every person who subscribes to curbside garbage would then subscribe to curbside recycling.
Oh, okay.
And that also includes, again, benefits and drawbacks. People who currently subscribe to curbside garbage would then have mandatory recycling, who may not want it. So again, it just depends on the population and what they're wanting.
So in some ways, it makes it easier for some people maybe, so they don't just dump it on the tipping floor when they stop by the transfer station. But in other ways, it makes it harder because if you want to get reimbursed for that extra cost on your product, you've got to go somewhere and bring all your recyclables to do that. Unless we can make it convenient and have it there on the tipping floor, like, hey, you get your 5 cents back I'm sure people probably would do that if it was
they
near the
do.
tipping floor.
Yeah, and our recycling area is right next to our tipping floor, so it's just a driveway apart.
Okay, so pros and cons.
Yeah, but that's an accounting, you've got to do a full accounting setup and
Yeah,
all of that.
I know. So yeah,
Tracking, and you've got to then have some
cost, the cost of the operation might,
Yeah, Commissioner French was next.
Well, and that was my point, is that one of the logics that we tried to apply in terms of creating the boundary was that, what differentiates, one customer from another, and being inside the urban growth boundary and that representing, urban services, that should be something that's required. Outside the urban growth boundary, that's rural, and so that's a different makeup in terms of the customer base. But is it fair to say that if we are providing, and I'm going back from memory here a little bit about the conversation about providing recycling in the unincorporated area, because you're going to be traveling a lot more miles per ton of recycling, the cost is going to increase dramatically for the carrier that's doing that. And that ultimately has to be reflected somewhere. It's either going to be to those customers in the unincorporated area that are demanding that service, or it gets absorbed by the system itself, which then means everybody's cost goes up to try and collect garbage in the rural areas. Is that a fair statement?
That is fair, and I think the cost would be, and I'm sure you guys have heard it from your haulers, this would be a major, they would have to buy new trucks and new carts. So this would be a cost to them that would be reimbursed by the pro. However, to incorporate unincorporated residents in this program, everybody then would be paying at the cash register on those products, so that less densely housed people can have curbside recycling.
They're still
Basically,
gonna,
you have I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Basically, you have the urban customer subsidizing the rural customer for a program that the rural customer might not have wanted to begin with.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Because I can say I'm in a 10 acres, 40 units up there. Everyone has to take their trash down to the bottom of the hill. They're not gonna be taking 2 bins down to the bottom of the hill. To do that. So there's areas that it's just not feasible to do.
Not feasible.
So,
Makes a lot more sense to just, if you were to do it, just have it at the transfer station. Rather than like spending all this money on fuel and
Fuel and trucks
trucks
and
and,
everything else. And
yeah.
oh, by
that's
the
where
way,
we
there are
just
no
take
EV
ours.
garbage trucks.
and a lot of times.
Just saying.
We take it to, the transfer stations where we haul ours for the most part, because if I'm gonna haul it down the hill, it's gonna take a
Might as
very,
well go.
so, we do the, okay.
Could I ask Mike about where the cities are, Mike, and the associate, like where are the city systems are on this? Because it would impact cities, I would think, as well. I mean, they already have kind of mandatory
Yeah.
recycling bins
So,
anyway, but
Commissioner,
there's costs.
So I believe AWC is pro on the bill. And your association, WASAC, is at a position, and Commissioner French, you know as well as I think they're neutral, but they're pushing towards some clarity in the bill. And that's the last notation I had in the narrative I provided about some certainty for you as a county. So let's just say the bill passes. And then you're going to opt in. You need clarity in your contracts with whoever it is that you opt in with to be able to get full cost recovery to protect the county's fiscal interest in the program. And that can be done, through model contracting or language in the bill. And then Lindsay also mentioned it's a big acronym, the WSWIFA, the funds. There's like educational funds that you use. And that's another thing that's in question, is making sure that, so for argument's sake right now, Lee, you're gonna have to correct me if I say this wrong. If you're spending money on recycling, outreach, and education with your LaSWIFA funds, which is a grant fund, you now wouldn't be spending that money. Would you then be able to take those dollars and apply them to something else? And I think when I talked to Deb last week, I think that you all use some of those funds for landscape and yard waste type outreach. Maybe I have that right. So that's one of the other questions, is clarifying that you're going to be able to keep existing grant programs and enhance what you're already doing. Does that all sound right, Lindsay?
Yeah, pretty close. So right now, we do use some of our LISWIP funds for recycling, education, and outreach. If this act was going to be able to cover that portion and reimburse us for those, we would use LaSWIFA towards other pressing needs that we have, such as providing free household hazardous waste disposal, as well as continuing to subsidize our organics disposal rate for residents, because with the passing of $17.99 last year, we are anticipating increased organics load. So that's yard waste, food waste that's coming into our tipping floor at our transfer stations.
And commissioners, I think as far as if you're asking about associations, I mean, you can imagine that these are diverse associations. You have large urban membership, and then you have rural. I think one of the criticisms I've heard about this bill, this is not my criticism, I'm just relaying one of the things I've heard. This is a one size fits all approach. And so you have a large urban county that you're talking about. You have constituents that live out in more rural areas that don't have recycling service now. Conceivably they would after this bill. Well, to contrast that with one of your neighboring counties that the whole county's rural. And so how does that work in that county? And then you'd have the same large city versus small city.
Yeah, so the conversation that's happened at LSC is, it really is split between urbanized and non-urbanized counties is really the if you had to define what is the dividing line between the two. I mean, King County has struggled for decades to try and improve their solid waste system. They tried to build a waste energy plant to replicate what we've done, and we're unsuccessful. So they continue to struggle. And so for a county like that, this program probably makes sense. For counties on the eastern side of the state, I think that's where the lion's share of the opposition is really coming from, is, cost impact. So the two opposing diametrics have created a position where we are neutral because we can't get enough energy on the issue to say, yes, we'll buy in, and enough energy to say, you know, we'll absorb the cost. So we are neutral with concerns, but the concerns are pretty significant. I don't think this is, well, if you tweak this and, you know, adjust that, we can get there. No, they're philosophical changes, and for a lot of the counties, this is going to be a big issue for them. So I'd say neutral is optimistic in terms of the dialogue.
So then, commissioners, that brings back to, are you comfortable with relaying the words I put on paper to represent your position? If not, do we want to change that, or do we want to relay anything at all? Because I mean, at some point, you know, we've talked about this for a couple, 3 weeks, and so I want to know, you know, kind of a clear position, what you all want to do. And so I tried with my narrative to encapsulate some of those things I'd heard. And then also add a note there at the end, supporting some of the requests from your association, which I think at the end of the day would benefit the county. If there was certainty in terms of the contracts and the cost recovery at a minimum, whether you philosophically like the bill or not, if it were to pass, at least those protections are there.
I just have one more question.
Okay,
Sorry. Can someone help me understand the opt-in piece? Because is there ability to not opt in if we like our system and kind of continue the way that we are going now? Sounds like there is some level of choice for counties to participate or not.
There is, although if we, so say this passes, counties can opt in or opt out. Opting in means you get reimbursed for education and outreach expenses, and for any cans or commodities that are collected at the transfer station. If you choose to opt out, you cannot get reimbursed for your recycling, education, outreach because of the rules in La SWIFA. La SWIFA states that you can't get reimbursed for commodities or education and outreach related to those commodities if they're covered by an EPR program, which this bill is. So we would lose out on substantial education outreach funds if we chose to opt out. So basically, if this passes, it would be in our best interest for the solid waste section to opt in.
Are those funds that we're currently getting? Or is that some new fund that's
So
available?
it's like there's grant funds that you have currently, but this bill would kind of create a new set, it refigures it,
Right.
that you have to opt in to get grant funds.
So they're trying to incentivize you to opt in.
there's nothing without the
Yeah.
So it's either, I'm sorry,
carrot. No,
you're either going to support the program or you're not. And that is a decision you make independently of whether you opt in or opt out. And they like to try and combine the two to make you think that you have an option not to be part of the program if it passes and you objected. No, you're going to be part of the program regardless. The only opt in or opt out is whether you are eligible for the grant money and stuff. And so it's a little deceiving, which then should raise some red flags. And so that's why I thought, you know, maybe the best solution for us is, you know, do a carve out that says if you got a waste energy plant, you know, but ultimately you're still gonna, the best solution is rethink this bill. It's too broad.
Yeah, it
And
is.
It's trying to
It's like
accomplish
4
way too
bills
many
in one.
things. Yeah,
Because you got like a bottle tax,
yeah.
you've got requiring recycling all across rural areas, which is very expensive.
Yep.
And you've got this change in the education funds. There's like 3 bills in one here, and there's probably a 4th. I mean, if we could just take some of those separately, then we could start to make it better.
When commissioners, that's why if you look at that statement, you know, I talked about the constituent issue. So Commissioner Jordan, to your question, opting in or opting out, whether the county opts in or opts out doesn't, in some ways for your constituents, your constituents are opted in if it passes, right? So in some ways, this is a gross oversimplification, but it's based on the premise that recycling becomes free for them, but it's paid for by, you know, if I'm Joe Packaging Company and I'm, shipping whatever, I'm gonna have to increase my cost because my packaging goes up. Conceivably. I mean, this is, big economic stuff. I'm just a lobbyist. But, so I tried to focus there on your, the constituent impact and then on the county operations. And you'll notice at the end of the county operations, I put a line in there about a statewide needs assessment. And that is one of the things that some of the biggest opponents of this bill have pointed to and said, hey, look, this is all well and good, great ideas, but let's do an assessment of need around the state for how necessary this is, study recycling rates. I think there's probably all kinds of things that could be looked at to come back and do something that's maybe a more targeted approach. I can tell you, though, that the political will to pass this bill is high. It's being worked heavily on both sides of the issue. There's a lot of folks that are trying to get exemptions from it for various reasons. I was part of a stakeholder meeting last week, and there was probably 45 different lobbyists in that meeting, just to give you the idea of the magnitude of how many entities this bill touches. I'm not sure how helpful that is, but I think, again, this statement I wrote, I tried to encapsulate a number of those things. And if we're not ready to share this, that's perfectly fine. But I wanted to try to come up with something for you to work from that we can share, because I think I'm going to get asked.
Yeah, and it's very basic terms from my standpoint. We have our marginalized communities in Spokane County subsidizing a recycling program in King County. It's just backwards and stuff, so.
Or urban customers subsidizing or rural customers. And I don't know if that's really the solution. Like, I think I agree with Mike that we really have to have a needs assessment. What are the needs in rural areas for recycling? How do we provide better recycling service that's cost effective in rural areas? And I'm not sold that this is the way to go. It seems like you're driving up all the other negative environmental impacts, right? Of additional trucks and miles driven, and I'm not sure you're gonna get that, like you're saying, are people really gonna use that curbside? It would be much better, I would think, to put the infrastructure at the transfer stations.
So,
I mean, if you did a
Commissioner, I'm not arguing
Yeah, I know, Mike, you want to move.
No. But I just want to be clear that all of those points you were making are valid. But if
this passes, we gotta have some.
Well, but if you had a proponent and you talked about the potential negative environmental impacts, which is kind of what you said, they would probably push back and say, well, wait a minute, it's not going to be negative for the following reasons. So it's, this kind of goes back to it's hugely complex. There's so many moving pieces to it. And so I'm not arguing that point, just want to be fair to make sure that I'm not trying to push this discussion one way or the other.
Commissioner, Chair, the thing that bothers me the most is like trying to force curbside in like rural areas or areas that, like you were saying, your neighborhood, that maybe it doesn't make sense geologically or geographically, that just doesn't. Yeah. And if I'm understanding it correctly, it forces that if you opt in.
There is again, complex unknowns. There is limited language to allow for some flexibility, but we just don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, I get it. So that needs to be way tightened up.
I know I'm actually opposed to this. I know Wasak's being neutral, but it's like, because I don't think citizens understand the bottle tax, the can tax and all of that that's gonna happen. But it always bothers me when bills are being placed that aren't letting the citizens really know what's going on, because this has not been discussed much at all. But I think we're already doing a really great job here in Spokane County, and I think it's just gonna make it more burdensome on us. And then, yes, like you said, it's gonna be putting the burden on the urbanized areas for the unincorporated areas, the rural areas, to pay for it. And so I'm for, it needs this, like you have in here, asking for, to slow this down, do a complete needs assessment. Every time, as we've seen with some of the bills, if they come forward, and especially when it encompasses a lot of different things, it's not a good bill. it's like they're trying to put everything in and, I don't know, it's not always the best for what they're really trying to do, and they don't, and trying to understand the unintended consequences of it. I don't think a 130-page bill right now is really looking at the unintended consequences of it, so I'm willing to oppose it, but I don't know everyone else is.
That's where I'm at. I mean, as I look through here, I mean, and you rarely see this many bills with as many people signed in to testify. I mean, this must have gone hours, this testimony, and a pretty eclectic group of people signed in opposed to this. I mean, you've got folks that are certainly associated with recycling, haulers, you've got waste management, you got the hospitality, restaurant hospitality, but you also have Washington State Veterinary Medical Association. How does this relate to
Well, that's why,
animal?
because
You've got another Animal Health Institute where,
so,
how does that?
Commissioner, that's because the bill, when it was originally drafted, covered prescription medication packaging for both people and animals. The animal portion's been taken out. So,
Okay.
So they were
And
successful.
well, Commissioner,
We want to
I
join-
represent an ag interest that is concerned about the bill when it comes to fresh, to fresh produce packaging that we're working on, a component of the bill. So you're right, though. I mean, it's very diversified. You're right. The testimony was lengthy. And like I mentioned, 45, 50 different interest groups in one room. That doesn't talk about the ones that weren't there, that couldn't make the meeting. So.
Yeah, but I'm going to agree with Commissioner Cuny. I think we should just oppose this.
And we do need to keep moving on our time here, so, Commissioner French.
Yeah, at LSC, I've represented that I personally am opposed to it, but the county hasn't made a decision. If we make a decision this morning, this will help a lot. Because I'll be over there Wednesday and can say, Spokane County is opposed to it. But I've been opposed to it personally because of all the reasons I've talked about this morning, especially the impact on the market. We got a program that's working, and the state wants to ignore that and try and create their monkey instead of ours.
So, I mean, we can be opposed to it, but to Mike's point, does that put us in a position then to negotiate anything, Mike, like any changes? Because if this does pass, it sounds like we gotta get all education costs reimbursed, and we've gotta deal with where are the exceptions to curbside and make sure that's really, that
So I
seems like
think-
the biggest area for opportunity, but I don't know, I mean, we can oppose it, but do you need us to give you guidance into, like, if, how do we make it better if it does pass?
Well,
Or is there any power in some of those?
you ask a good question, Commissioner. I mean, I think that if you're going to oppose it, you need to say why. I think that I've heard why, and I think this narrative I wrote covers a lot of those problems with it. But I also do think it has merit to point out, if you do want to improve the bill, we could point some things out, but it doesn't sound like from this conversation there's language that would improve the bill, but for don't do the bill or just do the needs assessment is kind of what I'm gathering.
Yeah,
So could we relay that statement? Because again, that seems to cover the points you've made and then supports your association's request to get some clarity if something is going to pass.
yeah, I like saying we oppose it. We think there should be a needs assessment that's specific to like more rural areas. And how would you best serve to increase recycling in those areas?
Well, and to look at what's already taking place within those counties.
What already exists and what could improve?
So you want me to try to rewrite that and then get your approval on it? But the only issue is this could get voted off the House floor this week. So I'd like to have something to share with your delegation here in the next 48 hours.
I think you know enough from this conversation, and it's being recorded, so if you need to, you can go back to it.
Okay.
To go ahead and move forward, because it's, everything right now is timely, so.
Okay. Okay, I think I have what I need then. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Okay,
But we didn't find out what Chris was.
No, I appreciate the statement. I like that it's balanced and it acknowledges there's laudable goals in the bill, but I think given the complexity, given that we feel we have a good system, here in Spokane County that's working, given the concerns about impact on vulnerable populations. I think it probably needs more study.
Thank you. Sorry, long discussion, but
No.
that bill's a big one.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's good. So off to the next one.
Exhausting.
So the next one is Mr. Sparber in the room, I hope.
Yes, Mike is in the room.
Okay, so this is that competency evaluation bill that we've been talking about a little bit. At the end of the day now, the bill's voluntary. But I want to know, commissioners, and maybe today's not the day to answer this, but Mike, you might have some ideas. You know, what can we suggest if this bill were to pass to make it workable? You remember I had asked commissioners if you had space adjacent to your jail that you could do some of these competency evaluations in. Doesn't sound like maybe you do. So just, you know, maybe as a board, you're not in a position to give us, you know, give me some clarity on this, but I just want to keep the dialogue going. I'm interested to hear what Mike has to say.
Good morning, Mike. Well, as I stated before, we'd have to duplicate a in-custody facility outside of the current jail that we have. And it would also require corrections officers to take part in that. I think it makes little sense for us to duplicate what we have. And we are in compliance right now. We are working with DSHS on our forensics navigators. So it makes little sense to me for why we want to create something separate from what we already have.
So Mike, if it was done though, in a way that would complement what you're doing, or even be able to take care of, say, state grant funds or state dollars to assist what you're doing, would that be beneficial?
I just don't know how we get over the hurdle with the corrections officers. That's the biggest
Yes.
So
hurdle.
it's the
Yeah.
workforce issue?
Yeah.
So, and I
Okay,
would say it's a workforce issue on the corrections side, but also on the mental health side.
Yeah, true.
I mean,
That's true.
I mean, Eastern State Hospital has worked really hard to try to staff out there, and they're having a hard time doing it. We're having a hard time within the rest of our system that, as we saw when the Mental Health Stabilization Center, which is gonna be our next topic, you know, opened up, you know, others closed because of staffing issues, and it took them a long time to staff up. So just because we're gonna have a facility doesn't mean we're gonna have the staffing at this point in time. It's a crisis for mental health and for corrections officers.
okay, so workforce is the bigger issue.
And actually, our jail is licensed already as a crisis intervention for the state. So I think Spokane is actually leading the way on some of this and out ahead of it. So
But Mike, had the bill not been voluntary, so since it's voluntary now, but had it not been voluntary, the bill would have dislodged what you're doing now, correct?
no, I think what we would have done is try to make an effort to show that we're already accomplishing it inside the jail right now.
Right.
Developed enough good relationships along the way that in working with DSH, it would be a matter of them sending staff into the jail. That would be the issue. And then there's labor conversations we'd have to have with some of that stuff, but
Mike, this is a response to the True Blood decision, and isn't the entire point of that True Blood to get these competency evaluations out of the jail facility itself?
right, it is.
So that the bill passed and it weren't voluntary, you're doing these evaluations within the jail itself, doesn't that become problematic?
We're having the forensics investigators come to the jail and work on that part of it, Mike.
Yeah.
And so, I don't see a benefit at all from trying to go outside of what I would think we'd make what we have
Right,
robust rather than going outside.
okay. So in relaying to our delegation, then it's probably fair to say that because the bill is voluntary, it needs to stay that way. But we think the bigger issue is workforce, both in correction officer and healthcare workers, health counseling, things like that.
Yeah, I honestly think across the state, it's a crisis across the state for corrections officer and mental health. I think it's a big ask, if you're gonna take that one on.
And
Okay.
I think, Mike, the other thing they did is they looked at the numbers. Juliana has those.
Yeah.
for, it's the bigger counties that have the real issue too. Where I think we were 10 or 12
Right.
here in Spokane County at that point in time, where it was like,
I've seen that chart, Commissioner. I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
so.
so.
Okay.
So again, it's kind of that, the thing that drives me crazy is let's just build something and then, but it's like, then we don't have the
Right.
operating dollars and we don't have the staff to support it for the long term.
Okay, I think that gives me what I need then. I just wanted to check back in one last time on it because it is moving.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay, and then the last one is 1050. This is the apprenticeship bill. Commissioner Jordan, you had asked me to find out some more information when we spoke last week. I think it's fair to say that the bill has gotten a little better. If you bring up that link I sent, if you go to page 4, line 5 of that bill, is Kyle there too, though?
Yes, Kyle's here.
Perfect. So whether the bill got a little better or not, there's still a lot of question about, from an administrative standpoint, what this means for the county. We talked in the past about availability of workforce. Are there enough apprentices out there? But if you look at that page 4, line 5, starting, well, I guess it's D, but this is the language that folks are pointing to that would give jurisdictions the flexibility. So in other words, the bill wouldn't apply under certain circumstances. But the question there is like, what is a good faith effort? What above you see participating contractors have demonstrated good faith effort. What does good faith mean? Who judges that? I think there's a lot of question around that type of those kind of unknowns in the bill. And Kyle, you can certainly help me explain it.
Yeah, the good faith is always a subjective criteria. So what does that mean? How do we want to judge that? What's the administration of that? How do you document and track that? It's open to interpretation. I mean, if it's our interpretation, that's certainly better than state's interpretation.
So in this writing, that was your concern that we talked about a few weeks back. In this version, it does give us as the county the opportunity to shape what that would look like, what our process would be of establishing like a good faith process.
Appears to.
Okay.
So Kyle, though, is there language you think you could suggest? And I talked with Axel this morning, so, and just Commissioner Sino, Axel does the work for the part of WASAC on these bills. Is there language that could tighten up this in your mind? And you don't have to have an answer right this second. To provide that clarity and maybe reduce some of the administrative burden as well. You need to think about it, think about it, and let's talk later.
Okay.
Yeah, because you can think about what the city of Spokane used. Talk to some contractors that definitely have opinions on what they've seen.
It's a big administrative burden. I mean, it is. There's no bones about it. It's another tracking mechanism. It's something that has to be reported upon. The simpler it is, the better. As far as the state's system is a lot better than the city's. Because it's more generalized. The cities got really targeted and really specific, which meant that everything was hand calculated and submitted and monitored, as opposed to the states is a little more, you can just pull an L&I report a little easier. And it's a little more general. It is a tough one to administer just because we don't have the optics, and so you're really getting into monitoring their certified payroll, and it's a lot of tracking.
And Kyle, but that's tracking that's required in current law or in what the city did?
Well, it's in the city's program, but if we are part of this, we have to do a lot of that same work. The other exception would be to exempt out the Fed aid contracts, because they come with their own training requirements and their own DBE goals as well that are required. So that always got really hard because those programs don't match. So the FHWA's training program does not match the apprentice program in the same way. So when those were duplicative, those became kind of challenging as well.
So my, part of what I know from, you know, my other, wearing my other hat is that the general contractors are the ones that are doing this now. And so it's just one unit that is putting, you know, worrying about that and turning it in and tracking it. Once you go to the sub-level, which is what this bill does, now it takes the burden off the general contractors, which is why AGC's, I think neutral or pro on it, I can't remember. But it puts it now on each of the subcontractors, which puts a lot more burden on the entities that are having to manage that. Because now it's not just the one general contractor looking at it, and like I know in some of the general contractors cases, they're doing a 20%, ensuring they're at 20% so they can make up for any of their subs that aren't doing it. But it's taken it down to the sub level, which takes the burden off the generals, but puts the burden on the counties or the municipalities.
We don't have a contract with the subcontractors, and we also technically, I mean, we're not even supposed to talk to them.
Yeah.
We are supposed to direct everything through the prime.
So that's why this
So,
just doesn't.
Commissioner, so I understand logically, as Kyle said, you go out for a job, get bids. Now, the subcontract will have to report to the general all this information that flows back up to you. The worry then now is that not enough subs will apply because they don't have access to enough apprentices, and the administrative burden on them and then transversely on the county becomes overwhelming. Is that logic? Does that logic add up?
I don't know that it has to flow through to the general contractors in this case now, does it? I mean,
Yeah, because the
even
contract requirement does get pushed through.
Okay.
So we make it required language
Right.
with the prime that has to be put into their subcontracts. We don't have optics to it, but it is a pass-through requirement that we push through.
But my understanding, the general contractors are not gonna be monitoring. You know, that's where it's kind of a mess from that perspective.
Mhm.
And not well defined.
Right. So then that pivots back to, that would seem to me to be, I don't know if a hardship's the right word, but whatever happens in that process, if you have a lack of subs bidding or then subs through the general bidding, because of these requirements, this language here on page 4 purports to give you the ability to opt out of that. If that's the case, do we need to clarify this language? Or Kyle, you made a point there about exempting federal, I think that was probably federal aid, I think is what I heard you say.
Mhm.
So that's a very logical argument, and it seems to me to make sense, that's something to consider. But I'm just wondering, is there a way to beef up this language here to give you the additional flexibility you need? And again, if you don't have an idea of what that could look like right this moment, I completely understand that. But is that something, commissioners, you'd like me to pursue with the prime sponsor, which is Representative Riccelli, about figuring out a way to maybe clear this up a little more, if that's, as a board, if that's the direction you want to go?
Sorry, which section are you talking about, Mike?
So this,
D.
Commissioner, that D, and then it starts at the underlying language is new law. So it says, and if you scroll back up a little bit, so keep the underline there. So stop there, thank you. So starting there with sub 2 on page 3, line 33, that's a wording entities may adjust the requirements of this section for a specific project for the following reasons. Demonstrated lack of ability of apprentices, okay? Disproportionate high ratio. So these are all different things. Is there language that we could put into this section 2, this subsection 2, to beef up your ability to get the flexibility you need, if that's, as a board of commissioners, what you would want to do? If you're comfortable with the bill, I understand that. If you're not, understand that as well. But if we're trying to improve the bill, what can we add in here to make it better?
I just want to make a comment that as a lawyer, looking at the exceptions, D is an exception you can drive a train through. I mean, it says that the awarding entity can adjust the requirements, other criteria that the municipality's legislative body determines, right? So basically, the way it's written now lets Board of County Commissioners seems to kind of set its own exception. So I don't know how you could get any more flexible than that personally. And I think we also need to look at the benefit of what these policies are trying to achieve. I understand it's appropriate to think about the impact and how do you implement it and what are the concerns, but we're talking about workforce shortages, and I do think that this is a way we can proactively encourage a pipeline of workers to kind of develop skills in the economy, and I think that's an important thing that the bill's trying to achieve. And I think we've got a language before us that lets the county's legislative authority really control the exceptions to it. I don't know how the legislature could write it any nicer for the county. Personally, that's my view on it.
So, Mike, I'm reading the bill report here and sort of the sort of condensed sentiments from those that are opposed to the bill. One of the lines here says that the bill restricts open shop contractors from bidding on public works. Is that true?
A hard one for me to answer, Commissioner. I guess what they're saying is an open shop would have less apprentices. Is that right? Though that gets into a gray area where I don't quite understand.
I don't know if you could say that it restricts. It is definitely much more difficult for open shops. If you're a union shop, you have full access to every apprentice program that's out there. Open shops oftentimes have to shore up their own programs. Or else they have to, because usually the union apprentice programs won't provide apprentices to open shops. So they have to then kind of basically start a program from the ground up.
Okay.
It's definitely more difficult for them to meet the requirements. I wouldn't say it forbids them.
And I guess this is just my personal opinion, that if we're gonna do a bill like this, then we also have to ensure that the unions are meeting some kind of apprenticeship, entry-level apprenticeship goals, because there's issues with that too. So then we're not getting the quality, the people into those programs. They make them somewhat onerous to keep their other members employed. So, there's just a whole, it's like, again, the unintended consequences versus what are we really trying to do here? And I would want to see the unions also being held accountable to it as well. So it's one of these bills that, like I said, I know AGC is neutral. I'm personally not.
You're opposed, right?
I'm opposed, yeah. I just think that there's better ways to go about this, and I think if we're going to start to have these, then we've got to start to ensure that there's metrics that the unions are meeting to ensure that they have an apprenticeship pipeline to then help fill these positions.
Okay, then,
I'm comfortable with, as Commissioner Jordan said, I think it gives a lot of flexibility to the county to set up the program. So I'm comfortable with it.
I'm opposed.
Yeah, and I'm opposed as well. It's in the industry's best interest to make sure that they've got a supply line of apprentice to move into the workforce. AGC's doing it, ABC's doing it, the union should be doing it. What is it? And I'm always leery when legislators, including myself, try and tell people in the business how to do their business. So I'm opposed to this for a variety of different reasons.
So we can still work on making language to make it better.
Mhm.
So I'm okay with that, but that's where we're at, Mike. There you go.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a long one today. Sorry about that.
Yes. No,
Recycling one is.
Have a good day. Bye.
thank you. Yeah, go ahead. I apologize, we're running about a half hour late right now, Steve, so Amelia, and I'm
Yeah, hi, I'm Clint Jordan with Pioneer Human Services. I'm our Senior Director for our residential programs across the state, which include amongst them the stabilization program here in Spokane. So pleased to be joining you all today. Amelia?
And I'm Amelia, I'm the director of the Spokane Regional Stabilization Center.
Today, commissioners are going to be given an update on the statistics and the operations of Crisis Stabilization Center. They'll also be reaching out after this to go down to the city and give a presentation, same presentation as well.
great. Thank you.
All right. Glad I took some notes because I cannot see anything on there. So the first slide up here is really the year-to-date, so 2022 metrics from the program. These are modeled out of SAMHSA best practice guide for stabilization metrics. So we implemented pretty much across the board the same exact quality measures we wanted to see. So right there at the very top, you have the patient service satisfaction, which is on a 1 through 5 scale. And so all patients who come through our service are given an opportunity to fill out this survey. And so the score there, as you see, is pretty high, close to 5. We served over 1,000 individuals in 2022, which, given the challenges in getting the program staffed, is for, I guess, to level set. For those who don't recall, we opened up doors October 16th, approximately 2021. And so it took us about a 3-month or so ramp up to be sort of fully operating in the 3 different programs within the facility. So really about February on, so for about a year, we've been pretty much fully operational and with utilization of the beds at a level we would expect to see. So we've been able to maintain that despite significant challenges on the staffing side that were previously referenced. I think some other highlight, go ahead.
Can you remind, how many beds do you guys have?
This is a 46-bed program, so there's 16 crisis mental health beds, 14 acute withdrawal management beds, and then another 16 longer-term residential treatment beds for co-occurring disorders. Thank you. Yep. We also have our kind of first responder-based and law enforcement-based metrics that are really important to us from a performance standpoint. So we want quick turnarounds when law enforcement comes in, so we track that drop-off time, and we survey law enforcement for their review of us, for lack of a better way to put it. And so wanting to know, are they satisfied? We have regular ongoing meetings to just make sure we're providing the service that they expect to see. Let's see, I'm trying to, some other highlights for sure, I think, for who we're serving and how we're able to best serve them is we have folks coming in presenting with, needing mental health services, needing withdrawal management, but we're, as you can see on there, we're treating a whole bunch of other issues when they come in the door. So other medical conditions that would otherwise be potentially referred out to hospitals. We've been able to handle a lot of that in-house, which is, really been great to kind of limit the utilization of other services. And then let's see, lastly, I wrote down the last one there is the referral to, not the referral, but the connection with more stabilized housing options for individuals. And so that's one that is incredibly challenging for us. It's obviously incredibly important here in the community, but we find that the vast majority of individuals we're able to get secured with a better form of housing than they came in with. That can be something more permanent. It can be reconnection back with family. It can be, a transitional option, but folks are not generally leaving homeless, which is an important metric for us. So feel free to, if there's anything else that jumped out there that you want to ask questions on, there's a lot contained within it, but I think a pretty well-rounded look at different performance metrics for us. Yeah.
So the one right above that, the 57% reported needing a primary. So that's 57% reported needing, or that were connected to a primary care of those that were reported needing care? Sorry, I was trying to understand that metric.
Oh, it's they needed a primary care provider.
So
When they came in, they
basically
need
1
primary
out
care.
of 2 do not have a primary care. And how many of those did you connected them to them?
Yeah, so we attempt to connect folks coming out with referrals to primary care. I don't know if we have it or not, how many sort of that follow-up have been successful in, showing up at the appointment, securing that primary care provider. But we can take note on that and see if it's something we can bring back.
But I guess you only have 24% readmission rates, so that means some folks are hopefully getting stabilized with ongoing care.
Yes, yeah, so we, our step down cares, I think we might cover it a little bit, but whether it's primary care, whether it's ongoing mental health treatment or substance use disorder treatment, we really have focused on meaningful referrals. We have several MOUs set up with other providers within the community. And we have added services that were not originally part of the program design. So supported housing and employment services come in and are really involved in that kind of transition out into the community, helping folks, literally driving them to appointments and making those easy handoffs. So, and then we spend a lot of time, Amelia could talk about our focus internally on just clinical discharge planning is pretty much the moment someone arrives, there's the whole care team around them that is focused on that.
So we have psych and medical providers, RNs, mental health clinicians, SUD clinicians. We all meet every single day and plan out discharge planning for our clients. And with that, anyone that completes successfully, we at least schedule an appointment with the primary care provider. To what Clint was saying, if they attend or not, we don't really have control over that piece. But everyone that completes successfully does have access and set up for them.
Right, can maybe jump to the next slide. Your turn.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
The clients served per day, 32 and a half, so that's the number of beds that are filled at any given day. That's not the daily flow, that's the total number.
That's the total number, yeah. So the two of the 3 are pretty quick churn programs by design. They're kind of like 3 to 7 day stays. And then you have the other 16 beds that are typically about a month long stays in those. So, and we just kind of side note, that number and the total served number could be, if you removed some of the impacts, especially earlier in the year with some of the public health requirements with COVID-19, and how we're able to kind of operate when we have positive cases, that's a continuing challenge. Some of the rules have changed to make us a little more equipped to keep doors open and serving. But then the staffing issues, we have to have mental health staff that you brought up. And everyone needs them and there's not a lot of them. And so for 2 of our 3 units, we have to have those staff in order to have clients in those units. And then we have to registered nurses, ARNPs, medical personnel is also, it's not as if that's a richly stocked supply of employees right now either.
Okay, so this slide talks about where we get the majority of our law enforcement referrals from. So city, Spokane police, cover the majority, and that would include the BHU units. We also get several from sheriff in the valley. And then there's, many others, Colville. I might need to go up there so I can see because I cannot see it.
A lot of the other, I think, smaller municipalities within the county,
Tribal
tribal
police.
as well, yeah.
Yeah, Ponderay, Airway Heights.
You're welcome to
Oh,
have that
yes,
one, and
that would be
Chris
great.
Chris and I will share.
There you go.
So there you go.
Oh, they have the
easier for
crown.
you.
I was gonna say, we're the two, both of us are like blind, and we have these Zoom meetings where we're like face to face.
So of the sheriff's numbers, do you have any way to identify whether those numbers are from the urbanized area or they're from the rural area? I mean, I'm thinking about unincorporated urbanized areas. Are they generating a need, or are we also finding folks in the rural area that are in need of services that we're accommodating as well?
Yeah, I don't have it available, but we could definitely pull probably something rather meaningful, because we do track multiple, either self-identified, hometowns or where someone's from, but also we can track where they, came from, or sort of last place of last housing. So there's a variety of ways we could probably get rather meaningful data on that.
Well, it would be helpful not only from the sheriff's standpoint of knowing how to deploy his resources, but also to inform us as to, we've got a rising need on the southeast part of the county or the northeast part of the county or whatever, and be able to, somehow respond to that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, good statistics for the
Yeah.
sheriff to look at, yeah.
Taking note of that,
Let me give you, Casey, let me give you a call on that.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay.
And this next one, it kind of can stand up there, but it's more about who we serve, based on self-reported ethnicity. And so, it's there, it somewhat mirrors the general population, with, I think, sure, I could have a data analyst in here who would, dive into, different, I guess, taking this type of work and the population that we generally serve and be able to kind of carve it up more. But that's kind of it right there. I don't know if there's any questions on it or not. Then some of the highlights.
So some of the highlights now, Clint mentioned earlier, when we first started, we were trying to obtain staff, which led to a 3-month ramp up period, but now we're operating at full capacity. So that's the 16 beds co-occurring, 16 mental health stabilization, 14 withdrawal management. We've had some pretty amazing patient feedback as well. One was when I got here, I was lower than I ever could have imagined a human being could get and still be alive. You supported my recovery, gave me coping skills, treated me like a human, and gave me a well overdue haircut. I've been living a life I never imagined I would reach so quickly. I'm confident in making right decisions. I make my own appointments, reach out to others when needed, and help others in need at any given chance to let them know my story in hopes that they too can be guided to recovery. The second one is I honestly felt safe and everyone is really kind. I have learned so much staying here and know everyone's story on why they are here. I honestly recommend this for people that really need it. And lastly, I was paid extra attention throughout the first night I was here, which helped to ease my worries about the possibilities of things like seizures happening. So that goes back to the medical care, the 24/7 RN coverage.
All right, next slide.
Okay, and then law enforcement feedback. I gave it all excellent. Everything was smooth and staff were professional. I was out of there in less than 10 minutes. That was from a sheriff deputy. I really love SRSC. I don't have issues with them, and I think that's great. I usually stay for 10 to 20 minutes each time just to make sure the process goes smoothly. Spokane Police, utilized by multiple law enforcement agencies, which we already talked about on the previous slide. And as Clint had also mentioned earlier, we have partnerships with Frontier, Stars, Chaz, Salvation Army, Oxford Houses, Revive Housing, and a couple others.
Things are going well, but there's always opportunity to improve. And so, I've detailed, our stakeholder relations are incredibly important to us and are critical for these programs to work. And so we're very intentional about that, and we'll continue to be. And we need the program to work for the community and for everybody involved and for the health systems. And so we are, I would say, just kind of throttle down there and just continuing to build relationships where we can. We zero barrier or low barrier admission, and so work with law enforcement, work with any first responders on what we can do and how we can all collaborate to make sure that when someone shows up at the door, that we take them and that person, that we're going to be able to care for them. And I think that the metric slide earlier, I think it was around 5% is all that we've actually had to refer out that have come in. So 95% who come in the door, we're actually able to keep there and provide care. So it's evidence that what we've done in advance of starting the program and continued has been working. Continuing to communicate with other first responders, law enforcement has been and will continue to be, critical focus area for us. But we we'll be working with EMS and others as well on opportunities for the program to work for them too. We talked again about the aftercare partnerships, so that readmission rate ultimately at 24%. It's for us, we can look at that and hopefully that number will continue to drop as we go through these efforts. Housing is incredibly difficult, big focus area for us, but it's there's the work we can do, day to day, and then there's work I know that Pioneer and other providers are engaged at the legislative level that are important to that. And then, data sharing and trying to make sure we're giving the program is able to demonstrate and show the great work that we see there every day. And so wanting to make sure that through feedback and other in opportunities like this that we are getting you all what you would like to see.
So I'm going a little bit from memory here, so I might not be accurate in this statement, but as I remember, the only ones that can be admitted into the facility are those that have been delivered by first responders. So if I'm a family member and I've got a family member that is suffering a crisis, I can't take them to this facility, but I can call the police and have them take them.
Yes, so it is first responder drop-offs. We can also, if you have a family member in crisis, we can help coordinate care for that person through our community partnerships.
Okay.
There are other providers. Pioneer also has other facilities that may be appropriate as well. So we certainly, our response is not to say, call somebody else. We try to help that individual, whether it's with us or elsewhere.
Thank you.
So in general though, with first responders, your most of your quotes and stuff are from law enforcement. And that's because there's usually a co-response between what I mean is EMS
Correct.
and law enforcement are engaging with an individual together who's having a crisis. And then the law enforcement will ultimately transport them. But does EMS ever transport the person?
So you have to have, there's license considerations. So there is, we actually in Whatcom County we are set up there now. It's not sort of in progress, sort of not. So we can have direct drop-offs there. It's called alternate destinations. And so It's something we haven't implemented here yet. We're in sort of, I would say, very, very early conversations around just the planning around what it would take to be able to do that, whether there's going to be interest from the county perspective, and certainly from us as a provider. That's great, but we want to make sure all parties sort of know the implications of that. But you can go a couple ways with it. We could have just the direct drop-offs. We could actually have an EMT staffing model would be another option that would be similar to what we do in our diversion program in Snohomish County. And so we're certainly open to and exploring different considerations to make it work.
But currently fire can't
Correct.
transport, so we have to be figuring out a different alternative. It's just a fire response to it, because they don't have the ability to put them in their truck and take them.
Yeah.
So that's why it has to be law. At this point, they're calling law enforcement and having them provide the transportation.
Difficult to tie them to the
Well,
back.
yeah, especially if people are very agitated and they need a safe transport.
Mhm.
So, can I ask one more question? So what, in those 3 types of beds, are you finding that in one of the areas you could use more beds versus others? Or how has that been with the division between crisis, acute withdrawal, and the residential treatment? Do you have some, like, are there times when the beds are all full, or what happens?
I'll let you start because it's kind of a complicated response to it, but you can start with the utilization for sure.
So the easiest part of answering that question is co-occurring beds, which is our 28-day program. There's always a need. It's constantly full. We could always use more.
That's what I was guessing.
And,
'Cause I know we don't have enough treatment.
No, and especially for
That's
women, there is
Oh.
hardly anything out there, but we do take women. So that's a huge need. For withdrawal management, that's another one, pretty much constantly full. But there's also an ebb and flow that happens. So when an individual comes in, they could go straight into any 3 unit. Generally, the best way that we found that works is they come in, we get them stabilized from their withdrawal symptoms, and then we get them put into stabilization, get them on the appropriate mental health medications, have them meet with a mental health clinician, and then if they want to pursue treatment after that, we move them into our co-occurring unit. So, but they could go straight to any one or skip one, it just depends.
So the complicated part of it is the last point you were making, which is when folks come in, generally, not always, but they're not presenting with just a mental health issue or just a withdrawal management issue. It's a co-occurring crisis. And so, but by the way that they go into the program, if they are, if withdrawal management sort of takes priority for the actual bed placement, because they'll need to detox or whatever before then, we can address, the mental health issues. And so because of that, the numbers sort of skew towards withdrawal management, fill those beds being full. And then you're going to have, of course, some drop off that happens if someone, they sober up and they don't necessarily want to, continue in the program. But so I think probably the best way for us, there's the utilization of the beds that's important, but it's also when they come in, whichever program they go into, what are the issues that they're actually presenting, and is it more broad than just I have a mental health crisis or I have withdrawal management needs?
And aren't we limited on the beds for federal purposes? So, so we can't go beyond.
We can't, you would think
we have.
it would be nice to be able to, go beyond 14 and just move them over into the other side of the house, but we're not able to do that, unfortunately.
Which is a federal issue.
Yeah.
So for these types of facilities,
It's
they have a
six-
cap
Yeah, 16.
16 beds.
Yeah.
when it's related to like law enforcement? Or in
We
general?
can't, we have to have the different populations divided from each other too. And so that's one of the challenges is we can't, if we have 8 folks in the crisis stabilization side and we have our 15th withdrawal management person, we can't bump them over and have them co-housed together.
How's the staffing currently? Are you having, is the capacity or the ability to serve clients decreased because of staffing issues? Or are you pretty much able to manage it right now?
We are managing actually pretty well right now, but with that being said, we've had to utilize like travel nurses, for example, because it's very hard to find nurses, but we are staffed.
We've had to get creative as well. So there's more telehealth being done. So we have mental health being done from across the state. We still have in-person providers as well, but we supplement with that. We have really focused on with nurses. They can be, if they have enough experience in mental health settings, they can become licensed mental health professionals. So we have incentivized that and really tried to have that efficiency of having nurses who also do mental health and specialize in that. And so, yeah, it's continues to be a challenge, but we've been maintaining and holding together, and doors have stayed open.
Thanks for your work.
So just a point of clarification, I know it's a law enforcement priority, for the most part, but we're not turning people away if they show up there or they end up there, or we are just, how does that work? Are we just referring them out to someone else, or?
So if someone shows up at the door and needs admission,
Yeah.
you can kind of talk to how you deal with it in real time, but generally speaking, I think they're referred somewhere appropriate to assess, and then
Or refer to get the appropriate referral to be able to come
Okay,
back.
I just wanted to make sure of that. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Commissioner Jordan said. Everybody that's talked to me about the service you're providing is just glowing compliments and stuff. So kudos, you've every expectation I had about this program you're meeting and stuff. So thank you very much for what you're doing. This is
Great statistics.
a great program. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I can say, having for Pioneer, kind of a global view across the state where we've done similar programs, not all of them have been this successful. And I think, I came in and got to be involved in a lot of the planning process around this before opening, and it goes all the way back to that and has continued with the very intentional collaboration with the county and with, really the whole community. There's a reason this one is working the way it is, and it's it's a model for how other counties, anyone else who wants to do this, that's the way you do it.
Thank you.
No, thank you, and I definitely have heard from other commissioners across the state that want to come over and take a look at what is happening here from King County to Skagit to Vancouver. I mean, it's just everybody's very impressed with what's happening here in Spokane, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Right.
appreciate you
Thanks a lot,
being here. Sorry
commissioners.
we're running late.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. Mr. Smith, come join us at the table.
I had a hard stop at 12:30. I just tried to push it on to 1, so.
Okay. Chris has to leave at 11.
Today?
Welcome, thank you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. You're gonna give us a presentation on Camp Hope.
Yes, I am. Thanks for the time today, appreciate it. Happy to give a quick update on Camp Hope. I'll share a little bit up front. I'll go through it quick. I'm not going to read from the slides, but I'll give you a couple of highlights, and but mostly available for any conversation or questions. So my name is Zeke Smith. I'm the president of Empire Health Foundation. Empire Health Foundation, so next slide, is We are contracted with the State Department of Commerce to provide coordination for outreach and engagement with services at Camp Hope, specifically under the Right of Way initiative. We work with a number of different folks on that, but in particular, the State Department of Commerce and the State Department of Transportation. And then we have 4 service providers that have been we've been contracting with. So we really are just doing the coordination function, and we've got a set of partners that are doing the work on the ground. That's Jules Helping Hands, Revive, Counseling Spokane, Compassionate Addiction Treatment Spokane, and then the Spokane Low Income Housing Consortium. The first 3 are providing peer navigation and outreach services. Jules Helping Hands also is providing some stabilization at the camp as we're working towards closing it. And then the last one, Spokane Low Income Housing Consortium, is really working on both identifying housing options that are available in the community, and then where there are options for us to either expand existing housing services and or where we've got big gaps in the system and need to provide additional types of housing. Next slide. Do this one quick, just telling you what we're going to do here. I'll tell you a little bit about where we're at in the process, what progress has looked like. I want to share a little bit about what resources we've received from the Department of Commerce and how we have used those resources to date. Happy to share more there if that is something that people are of interest in, and then have some conversation. You can go 2 slides forward. One of them is simple. I don't know who is running the slides, so I'm just saying that out. Okay, got it. Thanks. I realized I was looking at the wrong person. So currently, or as of the last population count, which was actually a couple weeks ago, there were 108 individuals that are still at the camp, 13 vehicles, that includes RVs, and 65 tents or similar structures. And I think it's a little more now, but 62 individuals that have been transitioned to Catalyst. And I can talk a little bit about that, what I know about the Catalyst project, if that's helpful later as well. And of that 100, or the 108 is down from a full kind of census count that we did in October of 467 individuals. There were more people that were there over the summer, but that was the point at which the services from the Right of Way initiative began. Next slide. Just a list of different providers that have been engaged in helping to support what's happening at the camp. That both includes folks coming out to the camp or the navigation tent that is next door. So lots of providers that have been engaged in providing services there. And then as well, some referral to other organizations. Jump 2 slides forward. On the ground, we recently done a fairly intensive additional needs assessment to really look at the population that's still there and understand more specifically on an individual basis what their needs are. We realize and know that as we get closer to closing the camp, we also find ourselves with a more acute population. That both means people who are more likely to have been homeless for a longer period of time and people who are bringing multiple co-occurring issues that are presenting for them as well. We know that many of those individuals, not all of them, but many of those individuals cannot be served by our existing shelters because they bring such intensive needs. For example, a number of those individuals can't meet their adult daily living requirements, which means that shelters are actually not able to house them. They're not insured for that population. So that population in some cases looks, I think, similar to the population that we heard from Pioneer about Pioneer has been one of the partners that we've worked with getting folks into the stabilization center, but as you know, requires engagement with local law enforcement to be able to do that. For the first few months of the services that have been provided there, those relationships haven't been very effective, but I think there's a lot of improvement on that. And as we look at getting closer to closing the camp, I suspect that there will be good opportunity for us to be working directly with the sheriff's office and with Spokane PD on how we work with them to access services that they might have direct access to. Next slide, please. I'll go through these quick. You've probably seen them, but they're just a few different visuals of how the camp has changed just since November. So on the first slide here, you see November and December. On the next slide, you see January and then early this month. So pretty significant reduction in the number of people that are staying there. On this last visual on the right-hand side, the February one, you probably heard about this, but what you can see is on the right side there, that's the side of the camp that is closest to the freeway. The fencing on the right has been moved in about 30 feet. So reduction of the overall footprint of the camp as well. Next slide. Good collaboration really actually with the state organizations, including DSHS, Department of Licensing, Department of Health. I think folks have probably heard about that, but it was really critical to get folks access to their documentation, birth certificates, licenses, and then access to services or resources that they might be eligible for through DSHS. Had folks on site for that, and it's one of the places where we have communities across the state that are actually pretty interested in how we were able to do that. Hopefully pushing on the state to do some similar kinds of outreach in those communities. And I'll just say too, it was really great to talk to folks that work for those agencies. Yes, they work for state agencies, but as we know, they live here in our community, and they felt pretty great being able to reach out in these ways. Folks who oftentimes find themselves sitting behind a desk and dealing with folks who are pretty upset about the kind of rigmarole to get access. So it was great for them to feel like they could really meet people's needs in a different way. So next slide. Also want to acknowledge that there's two goals for this right-of-way work. One of those is to get people into better housing options, but the other one is to close the camp. And we've been working steadily on both of those. In terms of closing the camp, there has been, I think, quite a bit of improvement since the services have been provided on the site. That includes in reviewing local crime statistics that there's been a reduction in crime in the area. We look at crime in the area over the last period of time. It mirrors, or I'd say it's not out of whack with what you see in other parts of the city. Although we do know that there's still crime that happens in that neighborhood. We also know that a few other encampments have cropped up in East Central specifically. Some of those include folks who have left Camp Hope, but we believe that some of the folks there are other people as well. But that's one of the issues that we want to continue to work with local law enforcement on. And we're working with the state on what it looks like to provide outreach outside of just Camp Hope as the camp closes. The intent is that these resources in the right-of-way initiative continues for the rest, for the future. The governor included actually an expansion of resources in his budget, and we anticipate that the legislature will also have these resources included as well. So our expectation is to continue to provide services even after the camp closes, specifically to individuals who we've identified as being at Camp Hope. But then the expectation is that that the state will give us additional guidance on providing services to other people on right-of-ways as well. And part of the conversation at a state level is whether or not those services are available to individuals on right-of-ways that are not just state properties, but other right-of-ways as well. Next slide. we have been able to capture quite a bit of information on what the population at Camp Hope, as well as the referral to other agencies and organizations. It's been hard for us to date to get that information into CMIS, just to be completely transparent, which I think provides us with the best collective ability at this point to aggregate that data and then be able to have that information available to different entities. But we're continuing to think about this as a way to really understand better what's happening with our overall population, as well as what needs we have in the local housing market as well. Let's see, next slide.
Could I ask a question? So what's the challenge with, sorry, I gotta follow up on that. What's the challenge with CMIS?
The short story is that the state and the city didn't actually get under contract for CMIS for a significant period of time after the service our service providers began providing services. And the CMIS department at the city had to create a separate program in order to incorporate this population. Many of the actual staff on the ground working for these agencies had not actually they were not CMIS approved, and they had not entered data into the CMIS data system before, so there was training that needed to occur. And then the other challenge was that in the negotiation, I think, between the state and the city didn't get back to us in time around release of information requirements. And so we had created a release of information, gotten those signed by folks on the ground when we did the initial assessment. The city didn't accept those, and so we have to go back and get releases of information, and a lot of folks are gone at this point, and so it's really hard to get those in place, and we can't actually put any the folks' information into the system until we have that. So there's more detail there, but it was a challenge. I think the bigger point that is worth calling out is I think we continue to need, as a community, a better centralized data structure. My hope is that that's something that can come out of conversations that are happening between jurisdictions right now. I know that you all pay into the CMIS system. There are aspects of it that can work, but I think we probably need a better system together. Could be building on that, expanding on that. I'm not saying it has to be a separate system, but I think we need collectively as a community a better way to have more real-time data and information to inform the kinds of decisions that you all are making on a regular basis about how you're going to support both addressing homelessness, but also additional housing in the community.
And I'll just state that I don't know how much you've talked to Dr. Velasquez at the Health District, but I mean, we really think the Health District can be the one to help do that. It's just getting the city of Spokane, they're very not want to let people into their system or access the system. And why I see the Health District being a perfect partner is because of all the HIPAA and all of that. So it's not, so they're not allowing the information to get out and get, out there. So I see it as it'd be a great, because we have a whole data center at the Health District that I think we could really work and get the data that's needed and have it be an independent group doing it.
Yeah, Commissioner Keeney, thank you for suggesting conversations with Dr. Velasquez and the Regional Health District. We've had some really great conversations. I think one of the challenges that the Regional Health District has right now is that it doesn't have access to real-time data. So what they can currently put together, I know they've worked on a dashboard, is really information that is more publicly available, and that's great, but it's lagging, and so it doesn't. They just don't have an ability to provide some of that info. But I think you're right that there's pretty strong capacity there, and I think we're going to want to be able to stand up an ability to have more real-time data that connects to each other. So it's not just about data coming from a set of service providers, but it's more broad. I think having first responder data is included in there as well. And you're right, we have some good capacity in the community, and you might as well use it effectively.
I'm hoping the consultant from Houston will help us figure out that technical side of how did they make a better real-time data system, so.
Yep, I think they can give us some good examples of what's worked there. I'm gonna go one more slide. Actually, there it is, next steps, thank you. So we're working on transitioning these 108 folks out as quickly as we can, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that we are going to have some folks there. We do have some folks there for whom our existing housing options, including transition shelter, do not work. So if we're going to close the camp expediently, and if we're going to get those individuals into somewhere that works, we're probably going to have to come up with some new options and solutions, and that's not going to be something that any one entity or jurisdiction is going to be able to do. We're working on some plans about what that might look like. There will be some capital costs associated with that, and then some operating costs, but I believe strongly that we can actually get the state to provide the operating costs. I know one of the concerns that you all have as local jurisdictions often is the kind of cliff that's created when we put resources in a short time period of time. So I think it's pretty important that we try to identify those ongoing operating costs from an existing source. But capital is still going to be important for us, and we're probably looking at a couple $1 million to get something stood up in a timely manner that can really address the transitional needs. The larger term issue here is we need more permanent housing options that look like medically assisted housing options. So it's really about that permanent supportive housing than we currently have. Frankly, I think that we would find that in the long run, those are cheaper options for us than what it currently takes for our variety of systems to provide services to this acute population that we're talking about. But so there's kind of two conversations there that I think are important. One is about this transitional need, and one is about the longer term permanent options. The transitional piece will be fundamental if we're going to close the camp anytime soon. We're committed to that. We want to make it happen, but we're going to need to work on it as a community. I think there are some good initial conversations on that front. I'll just acknowledge as well that the new sheriff has been really productive to work with, and appreciate that from him and also from you all. So we're pretty focused right now on thinking about housing as we move forward, both transitional and permanent, and then getting that camp closed and cleaned up. Next, same slide, but you'll see, and just here, there's a bigger picture here, and since we've had conversations over the last year, Commissioner Cooney, I think you've been really good at acknowledging that Camp Hope is one aspect of a much broader challenge, and that we've got to figure out how we resolve these issues in a broader context. So we're thinking about that and feel like it's really important as we move forward. I'll quickly do a little bit on financial transparency. You can skip the next one.
So the 124 is down to 108.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of places here where your slides are.
Things are moving every day, so.
Yep.
Okay.
So yes, it is down to 108. And then on this slide, I'll tell you one data point that's different here too. But financials. So we have a current contract with State Department of Commerce through June of 23 for $3.47 million. That includes resources for us on coordination. It includes peer navigation resources for, as I said before, CAT, Jules Helping Hands, and Revive. Jules Helping Hands also receives additional resources for outreach and for operations at the camp. And then there's resources for Spokane Low-Income Housing Consortium around housing navigation. So the total contract is currently 3.47. Of that, through January of 23, your slide says December of 22, so I'm giving you newer data. Apologize that it wasn't on the slide. Through January of 23 is $1,665,653.06. So we're on path right now to spend slightly less than what the state has provided through June of 2023. We're also at the very end of negotiating new influx of resource of 3.5 million for new housing supports, and that includes the same set of contractors, and then it also includes VOA, although VOA, in the negotiation, VOA will be contracting directly with Commerce, but VOA is providing access to their Hope House beds as those become available. They're also providing access to 8 respite beds that they have. The providers that we're working with are working on a shared housing model where they will rent houses and then provide supports to individuals in those rented houses. They're working on a rapid rehousing model. The city also is receiving additional support for that, where they're working with Housing Navigators LLC. So that looks like private individuals being provided leases with private landlords, and then supports that go around that. And then it also includes additional detox beds that compassionate addiction treatment will be standing up. I think it's 16, it might be 20 beds that they're working to stand up so that we have additional treatment options available in the community. And worth noting, last slide that I'll share at this point. So the other question that we get around kind of where's all that money going is that going to individuals? And so I wanted to show you how many staff have actually been hired. This is not full-time FTEs. This is full-time and part-time staff, but these are actual individuals. So you can see overall, it's about 100 individuals who've been hired by the agencies that are involved. We've hired one person at Empire Health Foundation too. And that will increase some as we bring on the housing resources, so for the housing supports that are required. And it might, it'll change in terms of Jules Helping Hands. A lot of those individuals across those organizations bring lived experience as homeless individuals. And then specifically with Jules Helping Hands, a lot of those individuals are Camp Hope residents who have been helping to support the stabilization of the operations there. I'll pause there and happy to answer questions.
I appreciate the information. I think it's been a lot of work on a lot of people's parts to make it happen. So thank you for what you're doing at Empire Health. And good to see we're getting down to lower numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chair. So what, you talked about like the folks that have high medical needs that need to be housed. So what kind of time frame are you thinking to be able to find and fund like spaces? Yeah, I'm guessing you're talking about people that have diabetes or other co-occurring issues that are high need, that need, I don't know, or have disabilities that need support, that our shelters or our just a regular home wouldn't necessarily have. Is that what you're getting at? Or are you talking more about co-occurring mental health and substance use, or?
All of the above.
Okay.
So part of what we're doing is figuring out with that 108 individuals more specifically what's going on with each of them, so that we have a better sense at an acute level. One, who may actually be able to have their needs met in existing housing options, either that are currently available or as they become available. But two, so that we can get clearer about, like, are we talking 20 people who need medically assisted beds? Are we talking 10? Are we talking 30? So we're working on getting that data, but it is a function of all of those different issues. We have individuals that are at Camp Hope who can't on their own make it to the restroom facilities and use them on their own. We have folks that have medication management issues that get in the way. So to be clear, they are having those challenges at Camp Hope as well. But the reality is the shelter system can't actually meet their needs. We don't have the same complicating factors, for better or for worse, at Camp Hope. So I think the answer to your question is twofold. One, we're trying to figure out, is there a transitional option or set of options that will allow us to move them from Camp Hope so that we can close the camp, but continue to try to support them so that we can ultimately get them into a more permanent solution. The permanent solutions, if we've got to stand up a new medically assisted facility, it's going to take us a while to do it. It's going to take us 18 months, it's going to take us 3 years. It's a longer pathway, so we want to be honest about that. But the transitional option, I'll share more soon. I don't want to get out in front of myself, but we think that there's a way to be able to at least provide the service that's similar to what they're getting at Camp Hope right now in a different environment, recognizing the impacts that camp has had on the neighborhood. It'll require finding somewhere else to do it, which is a part of the conversation that we'll need to have with local jurisdictions, but it's about how we get some transitional option that at least meets their needs as they're currently being met.
There's been a number of incidences that have happened with Camp Hope, around Camp Hope. Back in September, KXLY reported that any violent activity that was reported to Jules Helping Hands, that they logged each of those incidences. Do you know how many incidences of violent activity were reported?
I don't offhand. I could get that info.
Okay. Now I assume we'd all like to see, or I would like to see that. And then you talk about crime going down on Camp. Is that in relation to from what date? I mean, prior to Camp Hope being there, is the crime level below that initial level before the formation of the camp? Are you talking about from its peak population? How do you?
Yeah, the data that we have that the city council provided us with is from Spokane Police Department. It looked at the period from October till I think it was end of December, so it was the 3 months at the end of this last year, and then compared it to that same time period in 3 previous years, and it also looked at that data compared to other neighborhoods in the city. And so what we saw with that is that it was a reduced crime level. It was a reduced crime level from, and then also the time, I don't remember the amount of time, but the time period before, I think it was the 3 months before. So we were trying to look at were there impacts on the crime from the stabilization efforts that happened, the fencing that went around, the security that was there, and saw a reduction from before to after, and then looked at that in relationship to other neighborhoods during the 3 years previously, and saw that there wasn't a distinct difference between what was happening there and others. The patterns in terms of where crime went up or when crime went up and down was consistent with what happened in other neighborhoods.
Once the last person leaves, what's a realistic timeline to, do you think, clean the site? I mean, so some of these aerial photos, look, there's a lot there. I don't know what environmental issues could be left by, but what do you think is a realistic time to actually clean that large of an area?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a specific answer, but I can get it from Department of Transportation. I know they're working on it. I don't think it'll take too long. Part of the reality is we have a pretty good sense. They have a pretty good sense of what is going on with the site right now, and so. But I can get that for you. It's a great question.
Okay.
Yeah. As far as I know, the DOT hasn't. I mean, they know they've got to provide the cleanup of it. So.
Yeah. They're working on it.
I don't know what the date is. So. Well, thank you for giving us an update. Oh,
I just want to say,
Jordan,
I
sorry.
appreciate, I was just doing some rough math, and it looks like since the funding kind of kicked in, the numbers have gone down about 75%. So that's great progress. So I appreciate the work of everybody involved, and look forward to more.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I want to acknowledge, yes, in terms of closing the camp, that feels like really important progress. And the reality is that a number of those folks are not now better housed. A number of those folks are still homeless, are in different places. And so, which is a function of the population that we're talking about and working with. And I think it speaks to where we continue to have a need to work together. So just appreciation as well for where the county has continued to be supportive of both what's happening at Camp Hope, but also engaging in this broader continuum of conversation.
Well, and thanks for stepping in to be the fiscal agent and distribute the funds, and hopefully we'll get a better system figured out where we can do that more easily and get ahead of things. So
Working on it together.
thank you.
Okay, is Dr. Zing?
Our network might be down right now. Just a heads up. Yeah, so she doesn't log in every time she has, okay, if we have issues, just. Well, we have scheduling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we just ask her to try and use it?
She's there.
There she is.
Hi, sorry, I'm a little discombobulated this morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry for the delay. We're just running behind here, so.
Oh, no worries. There's a lot going on here, so I have had plenty to do, believe me. So good morning, everyone. I'm Veena Singh. I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for Spokane County, appearing before you again. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about something I want to put on your agenda in conjunction with purchasing. And I see my slides. Okay, so if we could get the next slide. The medical examiner's office is in receipt of $1.125 million from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services by means of a community project program to buy a CT scanner for the office. And this is the funds were already accepted by you all. Thank you very much. And then we have been, since the funds were confirmed, working on identifying the best CT scanner for our needs. Next slide. Just by way of review, probably most of you already know this, but a CT scanner is basically an advanced imaging machine that will give us a 3D view of the body. We currently have a Lodox machine, which is a full body X-ray that gives us a two-dimensional view of the body. But the CT scanner will give us a better picture for planning of autopsies in certain circumstances, and also in some cases allow us to supplant the autopsy with a CT scan and perhaps some laboratory testing. So it'll be a way to augment our staffing. And just the things I'm going to be touching on, because it's pertinent to our needs, are basically the physical structure of the CT scanner. So basically it's composed of a big piece with a hole in the middle. That's the gantry, and that's that big square piece you see on the left side of the screen that the patient's head is going toward. And the gantry is where all the imaging, the X-ray beams are coming from, and so the person has to fit through that hole. The table that they're lying on is another thing that's germane to postmortem exams, because we don't always know the weight of the person. So they have to be able, the table has to be able to support the person and allow for movement on and off the table. And then there's a lot of software processing that occurs to turn those all those X-ray images into the three-dimensional image that we then can use for diagnosis, and also for showing families, showing juries, and teaching purposes. Next slide. So the differences, there's obviously any number of CT scanners out there, and most of them are geared to imaging clinical, like living patients, so in a hospital or a clinic. And in those settings, the patients are mostly able to move themselves on and off the table, or at least they are movable by other people on the healthcare team that are able to move them over. And they are able to position themselves or be positioned according to imaging needs. And In the clinic or the hospital, it's usually only a limited area of the body that's of interest. So they would just get a CT scan of the head. They would just get a CT scan of the chest and abdomen or one of the limbs. And the goal is to confirm a diagnosis or diagnose an injury or a disease in order to choose the treatment. In contrast to that, our patients are difficult to move. They might be fixed in awkward positions because of stiffening of the muscles after death or rigor mortis. They might be frozen. They might have been in a fire and the heat stiffens the muscles in particular ways. So they may not be able to be posable or movable. The bodies may also be fragile because of fire injury or because of decomposition or because they may be mummified or other postmortem changes. And they also aren't coming to us necessarily just as the body itself, but they might be impaled on something. They might already be in a casket. They might be wrapped in some concealing item or enclosed in a container that conceals the body. And we would not just focus on one part of the body, but we need to scan the entire body, including the extremities, in order to see if there's any anomalies, if there's any bullets, if there's anything else there that is of forensic interest. Excuse me. And so our goals, in contrast to the clinic, we would need to document all of those physical findings and also, as I mentioned, potentially plan the autopsy so that we know when we take the body out of the container or unwrap the body, what we're getting into. Next slide, please. So for our needs, I asked around, there's several offices in the United States now that have CT scanners or in the process of acquiring CT scanners. So for the last several months, I've been asking around, interviewing people, reading the literature on what the best machine is for postmortem needs. And so the list that kind of was boiled down out of that is that we need, again, the hole in the middle of the gantry, we need it to be as big as possible so that even if a person is stiffened in an awkward position or they're impaled on something or they have stuff around them, that all of that can still fit through that hole and be imaged. We also need a high weight limit for the table, again, because we don't always know, one, how big the person is, but also what else might be accompanying them on the CT scanner. And then we need a very wide field of view. In field of view, I have a diagram here on this slide. Basically, the white circle at where the writing is, that's the gantry. So that the dashed line is the bore, the hole. And then what you see there, the red line is sort of the typical field of view. So a body may fit through that hole, but the x-rays are only capturing a certain portion of that body. But you can get what's called an extended field of view, which would mean that the x-rays would capture a wider area of what's traveling through that hole, or again, the larger part of the body. So we would need a machine with the widest possible field of view. And then the table, as I mentioned, in clinical medicine, the tables are sort of curved and padded for the comfort of the patient. In our case, what's more important is the ease of moving the bodies on and off the table and the ability to clean the tables. And so we would need to be able to configure the table in that way. And then several people in other offices mentioned that if the table has the ability to move within the bore, within that hole, then that's a lot easier than pulling everything out, repositioning the body, and then restarting that. So it saves time, it preserves the integrity of the body if it's in a fragile condition, and it is an additional safety measure for our staff here to move the body as little as possible. And then obviously we want the ability to produce high resolution images. And then the software is becoming really advanced now. And so as long as we're getting this machine, we would want the most advanced software package possible. And that gives us in the upper right of the slide there, you can see that on the right hand side of that image is the two-dimensional look at the head, but on the left-hand side is a three-dimensional reconstruction of that, so you can see more easily the fractures of the skull, which are those kind of crooked lines going over the top of the person's head. So just as an example, and that 3D reconstruction will also give us a better picture of where the bullets are for when we try to retrieve them. All right, next slide, thanks. So after looking at all of this, I identified one scanner that meets all of these criteria. And so it has the largest gantry bore, the hole, it has the largest field of view amongst the large bore scanners. And the table has a high weight limit. It can move side to side within the gantry. And it's the only large bore scanner that has the most advanced software package, the deep learning reconstruction piece. And there's only one company that makes this machine, installs and services this machine, and that's Canon Medical Systems. So once I identified the machine, I started a series of conversations with Canon. And those conversations were centered around the machine and if it could be configured to meet our specifications, and then also what sort of a training and service packages they could offer us. And ultimately, they did submit a bid for the project. Next slide, please. And so what I'm here to ask you, together with purchasing did approve my request for a sole source. And so I'm here to ask you to consider consider accepting the bid, from Canon Medical Systems. And the machine, this is the name of the machine, Aquilion Exceed large bore CT scanner. This is the price that they are supplying or have bid. And that price will include the CT scanner itself and the workstation to operate the machine and the software. Any modifications to the facility, so there'll be some minor modifications to our radiology room here at the medical examiner's office, just to move some plugs around and basically enable us to sync the piping and the cords and all of the necessary supply, everything running to the CT scanner, that it can be either hidden in the wall or sunken into the floor. They will install the CT scanner. They'll provide training, initial basic training, and then a later more advanced training for the staff. And this will also include 60 months of full service for the scanner and replacement of any parts. And all of this will be covered by our grant from the HRSA. So that's basically the summary of it. I don't know if anyone has any questions for me.
Mr. French.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So I've in my private practice installed MRIs and CT scanners, CAT scanners and stuff. And you have a couple challenges. One, some of the equipment requires that the walls and ceiling be lined, either with copper or lead, and I don't know whether when we constructed that facility we did that. So when they talk about modifications to the facility to support the scanner, would that include that lining? And then the other question would be, typically these units are taller than the doors, and so we have to oversize the doors to be able to get the equipment in. And would that also include modifications to doorways to be able to get the equipment in?
Right, so the room actually was lead lined, so that's really nice. They purpose built the entire room for radiology. And so, yeah, the entire room is lined, and there's a space that they left available for the CT scanner, and it'll fit nicely in that space. And we did have Canon, their logistics installation people came out just to look at the room, because we were also worried about how are we going to get it into the building, and how are we going to get it into the room, and how are they going to assemble it. And they did indicate, because we have those large double doors that you probably remember, that they can either turn on its side or get it in upright, but everything will fit through the outside doors and through the interior doors as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad I got my question in.
I lost internet.
You've been down for a while, but it just crashed for the rest of them.
Okay. Is the recording stopped? Dr. Singh, can you still hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. We will do the recording here.
We're still on YouTube.
Yeah, we're still live on YouTube.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I just want to say thank you because I know you've worked very hard to make this happen over the course of your time here in the last couple of years. So it's very exciting I'm sure you're really excited to see this, come to fruition.
Yes, it's really exciting. It's been, I feel like you say, it has felt like a long time to get this up and running, but it's a lot of moving pieces and a lot to put into place. So it is really exciting to see it come to fruition. And just as a side note, we've been talking with Inland Imaging, which is a large radiology group here in town, to work together with them on some training and some teaching opportunities. And so I think it's going to be a really good thing for the community and for the educational community also. So that's as you know, close to my heart. So that's going to be exciting as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can discuss this. Is recording resumed or not on this?
Well, we're still live and then we've
Oh,
got
okay.
the little recording here.
Mr. Davis has some information with regard to the contract on this device that I believe is pertinent to this discussion. If you'd like to talk to the board now.
So this is gonna be the second contract with Canon that I'm gonna be reviewing. It was not forwarded to me because it was done through purchasing, so Mr. Evans received it last week. Him and I spent probably all 10 minutes looking at it because we immediately went to provisions that were of an issue in a prior Canon contract, and I didn't even have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Waldrop at the ME's office or Dr. Singh about this. But there's an issue to two provisions: the waiver of warranties and the limitation on remedies. And the issue with those two provisions is that, and I think it's pro forma, but these contracts are drafted out of Canon, which is located in California. The problem is that they waive all express or implied warranties in the contract, as well as the warranty of merchantability and the warranty of fitness. That's a huge problem because essentially what that means is that if the item is not working, they're not obligated to fix it at all. And neither Mr. Evans nor myself had the opportunity to address this with Canon and talk to their legal team and to revise that. So even though there may be a 60-month replacement guarantee, Mr. Evans and I have not seen that document yet, and also it would contradict what's in the contract itself. So that went through Mr. Evans, and he did decline it when it was submitted, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, to be put on the consent agenda. So we're working on that.
Okay. So it sounds like we may be delayed another week until you
It's going to be our highest priority because it's a really expensive machine. I know that the medical examiner needs that.
So Dr. Zing, it may be delayed a week. Hopefully we can get it resolved within the week, but that is important in terms of the contract that we do need to make sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we do have, our Lodox is under Canon also, and they have been repairing it. So I'm hopeful that they'll sort of see the need behind changing the paperwork to reflect that. But we haven't had any problems with them since I've been here, with them coming to service and coming to repair the machine.
Okay, very good. Well, then we'll let the legal team work through that and make sure that happens. I believe it's scheduled for next week's consent agenda, so not tomorrow, but the following Tuesday.
March 7th, would that be?
So hopefully we'll get it resolved before then, but otherwise it may be another week delayed.
Sure. I mean, we want it done right. So yeah, well, we've waited this long, we can wait a little.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for catching that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Next, Kyle, we've got several things on.
Excellent.
Matt's recording, Deborah.
Matt and Deb are here as well. So we have 3 items for you all today. We'll try to get through them here pretty quickly and get back on schedule. The first item is an MOU with the city of Spokane. We're collaborating on a stormwater effectiveness study.
Good morning. I think we might have a few slides to look at. So while we're waiting, I'll start in a little background on what we're talking about here. This is part of our NPDES, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System stormwater permit. There's a mouthful for you. It's with Department of Ecology. EPA delegates their authority for stormwater pollution prevention to ecology here in Washington State. I'm sure you all know that. And there's 3 types of permits right now for stormwater. There's phase 1s, which are the jurisdictions over 500,000. So picture the King counties, some of the bigger municipalities. Phase 2, Western Washington, and then phase 2, Eastern Washington. And the threshold's roughly 100,000, which we're obviously over. There are 19 cities and 6 counties that meet that threshold in Eastern Washington, so we're one of those. And generally, the permit coverage area is the urban defined census area, so just picture the urban area. We've had a permit since 2009, and they're on 5-year cycles. So every 5 years, we get a new permit. As you might imagine, the permit conditions over time tend to ratchet. So we keep up with those. Let's see. I'll just keep talking. So what does the permit require? It has a lot of various permit requirements inside of it. Some of them include education and source control. Post-construction BMPs, that's our swales that you see around. Those are a type of BMP for handling stormwater. Erosion sediment control, they have a bunch of maintenance requirements that has an impact on our maintenance group and how they do their work. Inspections, spill response, and then a lot of reporting is associated with these. So one of those requirements is to do an effectiveness study. And we have some latitude on how we do that. And what we're trying to do is measure some aspect of our stormwater program and see how well it's going. See if it's working, see if it needs some tweaks to it to work better. So you can go a couple more slides if you'd like. Oh, not quite that far. There you go. Let's just stick with that one. So in this current permit cycle, what we're proposing to do is to go in with the city of Spokane in the valley, because they have permits also, and do a joint project and an effectiveness study. There's a site on Gonzaga's campus, you may be aware of it, where we've been testing different stormwater swale medias and different things on how well they perform, because obviously we put in a lot of swales. We'd like to believe they're doing a good job for the area that they take up. And this is going to be one more tweak on that. They're going to do that study again. They're going to pull out the swale and they're going to take another look at it and see how it does. And they're going to focus this time on seasonal changes and also how winter maintenance affects them. If we put a ton of salt down on the roads, is that having an impact? So our proposal is to go in collaboratively with Gonzaga and do it. It will be a good deal for us. Instead of having to pay for a whole effectiveness study, we'll just be paying for our portion of it. So that'll be good. And the other added advantage is these other jurisdictions have the ability potentially to get ecology money to help pay for that effort. So it's kind of a win-win for us. So that's the background on it. The agreement's still kind of going back and forth. Legal's looking at it and everybody's kind of wordsmithing it a little. We hope to have that in the next week or two, and then we'll bring that through on a consent agenda item. Anybody have any questions on that?
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, no, it should be really good.
Can
And
I ask a quick question?
yeah, you bet.
Have there been updates to our region's stormwater kind of regulations? I know that there's been worked on for like many, many, many years to allow for different methods. Is that what this project is trying to help move along?
A little bit of both, yeah. You know, this project.
I'm
will-
concerned that we're still putting in lots of grass that has to be mowed and watered, when we know that like other types of treatments, like native plants and other types of, soils can also be effective.
Absolutely.
But I remember way back that the state wasn't necessarily allowing some of those things.
You are correct.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we're still working on that, and some of the effectiveness studies have revolved around that. And really, I mean, the bottom line is the organics in the soil are what perform the treatment. Grass and plants are really good at replenishing those organics and keeping them at a certain level to treat the stormwater, but there's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, you can till in compost into soil and it will treat stormwater just like plants were there, but then long-term, how do you replenish that has always been the state's response back. So that's an ongoing conversation. We are pushing for that. As you point out, it's fairly counterproductive to plant a bunch of bluegrass, irrigate it and fertilize it and put weed control on it. So, you know, it's a good conversation and we are pushing on that. I think a lot of entities are. So I suspect we'll get to that point sooner than later.
Just wondering if there's any movement on that front. I feel like we've been talking about it for 20 years.
We have. I can vouch for that.
Okay,
Any other
thank you
questions?
for indulging me.
Okay, Deborah's gonna brief us on the next one.
Tax title property. Tax title property is when you don't pay your taxes for 3 years, the county forecloses on your property, or at least the treasurer does, and they hold an auction. And if nobody buys the property at that auction, the county becomes the highest and best bidder for the taxing districts. The county does not own the property. We are the trustee for the taxing districts for that. And so we have a piece of property that is, next slide please, that is approximately half an acre. It had a large building, next slide, on it. And there was a huge fire and other things. And next slide. And you can see that the city of Spokane went through and they spent approximately $418,323 to clean the site from that devastation. It's a half acre. The assessed value now sits at $157,350. The city has approached me wanting to purchase the property. Usually when I sell usually the jurisdictions get first dibs on any tax title property. Any government agency gets first dibs on it. And they can buy that piece of property for the principal amount of back taxes owing. Now, when the treasurer went through and auctioned this property off, they auctioned it for $655,413. But the principal amount of back taxes owed on that piece is $425,025.47. Now, by the RCWs, we can sell that property for not less than the principal amount of back taxes owing to any other government agency. So we usually go through and let the city go through and remove their liens off of it and then sell it for the rest. And so in this case, it would be $6,702.19 that we could sell it to the city for. And that is what we'll be bringing in front of the board at your consent agenda. Any questions?
So the city is willing to pay $425,000 for it?
No, they removed their lien.
There were a lot of liens.
So in essence, nobody
but
can buy
I'm
it
sure
without
you-
paying those. The
Yes,
city gets to basically
yeah.
say, we don't need to collect those liens because
Yeah.
we put them there. So that basically goes away when they go to buy it.
But do they understand that that's gonna be the price?
Well,
Or are we going to be able to charge them that
could've-
lower rate?
Yeah, I could have sold it as $425,025.47, but it doesn't really make sense to go through and say, hey, city, hand over that amount just so that we can reimburse you that amount. And so we let them go through and give us a letter saying, remove our lien from it so that it reduces it down to the principal amount of back taxes, which includes the school districts, the weed control, the soil, all of that other thing, which only came out to be $6,702.19. So that's what we're going to, well, if you guys agree, that would be what we would sell it to the city for, the 6,000, knowing that we took off the 400. Now, if the county itself wanted to buy the property, we would have to pay the $425.47 to get the property in our coffers if we wanted to buy it, because the city's liens have to be paid.
I mean, this has been a problem site. I'm looking over at Kyle. It was like an old nursing facility. It was then kind of a halfway house. It had the fire. It's an opportunity site that hopefully can be developed right next to the freeway, the new freeway entrance at Market in Wellesley. So, I mean, we need to get this property in so I don't know what the city's plans are if they're gonna do housing or something on this property, but it needs to be utilized. Is what I say.
They haven't told us what they're going to use it for, obviously, though they're very.
But I'm glad, this has been going on and on and on for
Good opportunity.
10, 12 years, I don't know. I mean,
What
the
year was the
liens are
burn?
from the
Oh, yeah,
previous
yeah.
owner,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's been a minute, and they're also rebuilding that stretch of roadway this year as well, to tie into the new off-ramp. Yep, so hopefully go into a higher and better use. But since they have that monster lien on it, I think we would advise that we sell it to them. I think that makes sense.
Scott has it. Okay, Scott?
Hello. Commissioner Kearns will recall this is a site that the NEPDA has been looking at for quite some time. It's been in lien foreclosure off and on for many years. And I think the city has been challenged because they did expend a lot of money remediating a lot of the fire damage and some of the asbestos removal in there. So I know it's something that the NEPDA would like to be engaging in a conversation, I think, with the city on. I think that's something that Commissioner Kearns and I could probably talk a little more with them about. How could that be repurposed, revitalized, and reinvested in, and still maybe provide an opportunity for the city to get recovery on the outstanding funds that they had spent as well.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm fine.
Thank you.
And we have one more traffic code revision to preview as well.
Thanks, Deborah. Thank you,
Yep.
The last one's a quick one. We had a neighborhood approach us. Next slide, please. And you can see this is just on the South Hill, kind of the backside where it starts getting more rural. I think one of you in particular is very familiar with this section of roadway. It's a little quiet, dead-end section of road. It's Ellis and then 80th and Cuba Street, and they're very rural. 10 houses, I believe, total, are all that access this portion of roadway. And the neighborhood approached us wanting to reduce the speed limit from 35 to 25. Traffic engineer went out and took a look, and he agrees it's narrow, it's windy, some sight distance issues here and there. Slowing it down would not be a bad thing, and it is so short and so few homes that it made a lot of sense. So that's the proposal. Any questions on that? All right, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Matt.
Hi, Justin, thank you. We're running behind, so appreciate you waiting.
Not a problem. Good morning, commissioners. Scott. I've got a couple different things on the docket here. They're kind of wide ranging in different areas, so I'll touch on these as best I can and go quickly through this. Please ask any questions on this because again, I'm not always aware of which parts you know about this and which ones you don't. So if you want to go to the first slide here, as discussed in our last update on the ASO division contract, we would be seeing a lot of our downstream contracts coming through. This is the first set of the contracts for the year for our crisis providers. This provides all crisis services within our 6-county region. In Spokane County, that is Frontier Behavioral Health, and that includes the regional crisis line. They are also our 988 hub, for those that are aware of that. So this just continues the existing contract we have in place. as well as their other special programs that they run. Children, Youth and Family Program, to do crisis response services, mobile response and stabilization services, their regular mobile crisis response services, and then again, like I said, the regional crisis line, which provides the support for our 6 county and in conjunction with the 988. For Adams County, it's Adams County's Integrated Health Services. Pend Oreille is Pend Oreille Counseling Services. And then for Stevens Ferry and Lincoln counties is Northeast Washington Alliance Counseling Services. So our request is that we, commissioners, approve us move forward with existing crisis contracts for those, for our whole region. Questions? All right, next topic. Phoenix Apartments. So for our new commissioners, Phoenix Apartments are a specialized therapeutic support housing program. Building is owned by Spokane County and is run by Pioneer Human Services. It provides transitional support for those coming out, primarily at Eastern State Hospital, but anyone with severe and persistent mental illness that have or have a history of incarceration historically and or significant involvement in a state hospital or other psychiatric facility. The goal is to transition them from that intensive inpatient setting back into the community. Oftentimes individuals transition from an inpatient to individual care is a bumpy road. This provides that transitional, generally 6 months to up to a year to get them that bridge gap so that they can move in and be successful in the community. This has been run by Pioneer Human Services for quite a long time, and we're asking that this continue. It's a very valuable and beneficial service to the community and really fills the gap necessary for those that are transitioning from restrictive environment so that they're more successful in an independent setting. Any questions? Yeah.
So you have funding as non-Medicaid sales tax. So is everyone that lives here, they're not eligible for Medicaid?
So the transitional housing that's provided, there isn't Medicaid services especially for that type of program.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so because it's a housing-based support service and they're not provided direct treatment, we can't access the Medicaid dollars for that.
Got it.
And oftentimes, even if the individuals are Medicaid and we can't access that, we end up seeing them primarily through our system anyway. So this is a great least restrictive alternative and cost benefit to the county.
So this morning we had a presentation on the last year of the Stabilization Center. Would any of those folks have come and, after they've done their treatment at the Stabilization Center, would any of those folks ever be at the Phoenix Apartments?
Be eligible? And yeah, they could be. Generally, we're talking about medical necessity differences there, right? In the Regional Stabilization Center, there's a set period of time for individuals experiencing severe and persistent mental illness, usually episodic. So they go through there, and if individuals are in the community in an independent setting, they'll just return. This is primarily for those individuals who've been at Eastern State Hospital for 180 days plus, right?
Oh, significant period of
And
time.
then
Okay.
that going in is people will pop in and be able to make their food and take care of themselves. So it is possible, though, that there are people that are in the Phoenix that have an episodic period where they're diverted through the SRC and then they return, but their housing isn't disrupted. And so that way they aren't on the street. Again, makes it so we don't have to worry about more intensive challenges with getting them housing.
And how many units does the housing apartments?
At last count, I'd have to get you that number. I apologize off the top of my head. They went through some renovations, so I don't remember the last bed count.
Curious.
Yeah. Greater than 10, less than 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, next one. And next one. All right, this is for our Raintree Systems contract. So for any healthcare or behavioral healthcare system, you'll need an electronic medical record system, EMR or EHR, electronic health record system, as well as a data tracking collection system. We maintain both under Raintree. So for our ASO, that includes all services reported throughout our 6-county region for crisis, as well as any services paid by the county as reported up. Those go to the state with data transfer for those that are reported to the state. For the ones that are just tracked internally or locally, that's all maintained. For our CARES division, which is direct treatment services, a separate portion of that system is used as an EMR. So all clinical records are maintained in there. For anything from outpatient services to housing support services, they'll do the chart notes and roll those out. Braintree's been around since the RSN era, and it's really been a stable and cost-effective measure for our department. Because we have developed it over the years, it has been very beneficial to the extent that other ASOs have stolen our system through the company, the same setup that we have so that they could benefit from it. So we're just requesting that we continue the contract for that same system to maintain our ability to track data and report.
Madam Chair. Is the jail included in that with Braintree?
No, they're not, because they're no longer contracting for the jail transitions services. So that was the direct state contract. They used to report in that, but because they don't provide a report services up as part of that contract, they don't have access to that. Just
It's wrapped around the Medicaid dollars, is what you're saying?
No, this is directly for the ASO side, for those that have a contract for the non-Medicaid and or one of our services. So the only access they would have is if they're actually providing it. And since the jail discontinued the jail transitions contract, it would just be an ancillary connected one. They don't have any direct engagement in the system.
So is there a way to claw back to get connectivity to that, or do you know?
That's entirely up to the commissioners. If they had access, they would have access to services that are only provided to non-Medicaid. Yeah. So we used to have the whole Medicaid system under the BHO, and it was helpful. Since that time, the jail has found that it wasn't very helpful because we only have like 15%.
Yeah.
And really it's not a whole picture. And we don't have access to Medicaid. So I think that's why historically jail said you find more benefit, I think, in the system you have with CoreLogic through the emergency department system that they use than we have access to anymore.
So can I have an opportunity to talk to them about Braintree? Because I know they brought it up before, and so
yes,
I would like that opportunity to talk to them and see if maybe we approach the board and see if there's something we can do to include them as well.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, tell that to the commissioners.
Always have to have the discussion.
Any other questions? That one? All right. And the last one is a request for our approval of our contract for SRHD for the purposes of outreach and linkage services. This is a unique one. We do this RDD services to maximize the usage of Medicaid dollars. So we could engage directly with the provider in the community. However, by partnering with SRHD, they can then access Medicaid, match those dollars, and then they sub-delegate it out. So that's why you see us sub-delegating it and then it's sub-delegated. We want to maximize the Medicaid dollars so that there's a greater, well, let's be clear. We want them to pay for their portion that's necessary for Medicaid individuals, and then it also extends our reach and availability. And really the services provided in this contract are navigational, supports individuals to get into Medicaid covered services. And this is really pertinent, especially now. I don't know if anyone's aware of this, but Medicaid's going under a reinitialization process. So individuals have to recertify their income and their address. It's a huge national push. And so Washington State's doing as well. Often when this happens, individuals are dropped from Medicaid because they'll have a letter get sent out and they immediately don't provide it. They'll get dropped until they reinitialize and resubmit their information. We expect, and the state does, that a significant amount of individuals will be dropped temporarily while they are trying to access that. So this helps to reconnect and bridge that gap to get them back into services.
Thank you.
Yes, that is it.
Any other questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I know I've got Doug next, but Ashley Callan is here and needs to be on her way. So since we're running late, I'm going to move on to Ashley.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will be very brief. I I just brought a few attachments if you could pass them down to Mr. Walter, I appreciate it. And
You'll be next.
For Commissioner Cooney. There's a packet for each. Yeah, I didn't know who all would want them. I have extras if other people would like them. What you have is a little synopsis of why I'm here today, as well as the contract that I believe will be on the consent agenda next week. This is at least the fourth renewal of this 3-year contract. The City of Spokane contracts with Superior Court to provide jury services for them. And the contract just asks that they pay their fair share of the administrative costs. I provided historical amounts that we billed them at the end of each year. You'll see that goes up and down. It's really not predictable just because it depends on the amount of jury trials that total are sent out, as well as what the amount that are specific for municipal court. So it's not really a predictable amount that is brought in each year, but we just do ask that they pay their fair share of the administrative costs that staff that work for me spend providing them with their jurors. And again, this will be the fourth renewal. You'll see that it was supposed to start at the beginning of 2023, and despite our best efforts to get it signed before then, it takes time to weave through. City Council legal here has reviewed it, and then once City Council approves it today, that's the plan at least, it will come to you all to approve. And that's really why I'm here, unless any questions that you may have about the contract or how it works. We do also bill them for their hard juror cost each month. So for instance, if they need a jury for next week, then at the end of that month, they'll pay for their juror fees. So that's in the contract, but not included in these administrative costs that is provided at the end of each year. And I think that's why I got to skip in front of Doug, because mine was very quick.
That's gonna be quick. I just want to be clear. So we're charging for all the appropriate costs. So municipal court's covering all the costs that we're incurring on their behalf.
Correct.
Okay. And legal.
Mr. McLean reviewed it back in November. And again, it's the exact same contract that has been renewed. This will be the fourth time.
Okay.
So aside from the dates changed. Anything? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have fun with Mr. Chase. Thank you. Thank you.
Would you like a seat?
Yes, have a seat.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, we're running behind today, so take your time.
We were behind by more, but we
caught up.
Yeah, I definitely, he's on there, but I think today it'd be nice to hear from you. Right. Morning.
Looks like Gina handed out a copy.
Of the agenda sheet, yes, and I do have, I think there's been a few adjustments to the agreement since this went out on Thursday night, Friday morning, that I have, and then I'll speak, I think there's even more, but I'm going to speak to these. And let's see, Commissioner, did you? Okay. All right, well, good morning, and thank you, commissioners. You have the agenda sheet there, which is great. That has not changed. This before you, I'm here to brief on the shared expense agreement. And you may recall the MOU, which was adopted last week, kind of sets the foundation for two future agreements. One, the financial framework for the shared expense agreement to go forward in facilitating how we move forward with completion of the project based on the matching dollars and terms that were set forth in the MOU. And then the second side of that will be a future new lease agreement. So not here for the new lease agreement today, just that first step is taking those terms from the MOU related to the funding side of the project and formalizing them in this shared expense agreement. So a lot of these terms are identical, if you will, to those included in the MOU, and then we have additional framework involved, including in Exhibit A, we've taken it to like a schedule, if you will, where we've identified dollar amounts based on the timing of the anticipated timing of the projects, at least certainly for the first year. And that's on the very last page of the agreement. But the new development, since this went out, you may recall in moving forward towards the GCCM alternative delivery method, we have to have special legal counsel and an owner's representative. We've advertised for the owner's rep following the briefing on that on the 13th. But Mr. Evans, Casey Evans, who's on there somewhere, in looking into the legal services side, the legal counsel side, it came to his attention that we have to have the funds come out of a separate fund or account, if you will, dedicated for the legal, as the special legal representation can only represent the county. So the adjustment in the version of the agreement that I've handed you, it effectively on the second tab proposes a new section 3.4 that states of that first set of matching funds. In this case, in the exhibit, we are matching $1 million. And what we're saying is we'll take 100,000 of that and we'll establish a legal fund and put it into an account for the legal services. And then the remaining 900 will go into that capital fund. So it all goes towards the improvements and the project, but we're effectively in the exhibit, you'll see we have 100,000 earmarked for the county's legal account, and then the remaining 900, and then the verbiage here in, again, section 3.4, if we find we don't need all of those funds, then we would move the remaining funds back into that capital account. But that way we address all of the concerns that Casey mentioned that we have to have in place in order to bring on the outside legal counsel specific to the GCCM alternative delivery.
And I can speak to that briefly. So we're in need of hiring legal counsel to help us with the GCCM process. It's really a finite expertise, very specialized area of practice. And I have not done the GCCM process before. And so for this process, considering the size of the project and navigating the GCCM process, we're going to need to retain outside counsel. Now, in future, that's for this project. I intend to look at everything that council is providing us, and then we may in the future take that and be able to advise the board and the county departments on this process once we see how it's done, essentially. And the reason that we need to establish a separate fund for this, and it needs to remain separately, is because the bar rules would not allow us to jointly procure counsel in this instance, and we have to, because the counsel that we're retaining is going to provide us legal advice, not Long Ball or any other entity. And so to establish that relationship as well, my boss, Larry Haskell, will have to make a special appointment of a deputy prosecutor to this attorney who's going to be working on this project, and then they will be our counsel. And at the end of that period, if whatever funds aren't expended for the services of the attorney, we'll be able to take those and put those back towards the project as a whole. But it's really essential and of paramount importance that these funds remain separate.
Thank you. So Commissioner French at the airport, because you guys, with the Trex project, did the GCCM.
Yes.
Is that similar to, I don't know what happened out there.
Yeah, so we do not have the committee structure that they're being proposed here. We did get the designation from the state to move forward with that program and stuff, and so we've hired a consultant. We do have a consultant that consults us on the consultant, but you know, other than that,
Did you
we're-
hire separate legal counsel for it?
This is supposed to be.
you know, that's a great question. I can't remember. I don't want to say one way or the other. I can't remember whether I know that we had legal counsel, Brian Worst was heavily involved with it. But I can't remember. I wished I remembered, but I don't. We did that last year, so I can't remember whether we had separate legal counsel or not.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, I can find out for you and let you know.
That'd be good, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I understand. I mean, it's definitely looking at the legal aspect of it from a whole different perspective, so I can see why, you know, it would be necessary to have. So,
And part of this is because the airport has the designation, is my understanding, and the county
Believe
has yet
they're
to go through this
certified.
process, so they're certified, whereas the county isn't yet certified. So I think that's part of why we need outside counsel as well, for the first time we go through this process.
With the owner's rep and the special counsel that have done many of these projects before. And like the airport that has done so many of them, they've developed that experience, they've been able to get certified, so they're no longer required to have an owner's rep and outside counsel because they have demonstrated the experience. And so in our case, because we're new to it, we are obligated to have that in order to make that application and to be successful. That's how they help ensure success through the alternative delivery.
You don't want to make a mistake on a project of this size.
okay, so I understand that, thank you. And so Randy, you are aware of the separate accounting and all of that?
I do have one more thing to add, especially for budget. It's of paramount importance that the money that is put into that 100, into that separate fund is also only county dollars. So it can only be the county's money that's put into that fund. So we can't pull money from the pool and put it into, you know, we can't like take the capital account and transfer money from that to this account. It has to be coming from the general fund or from county's money into that account.
Understood.
He's got it.
And I believe that's how that's reflected within the agreement as it is currently adjusted.
So I just had the opportunity to review this and just got it, so I've still got some questions, but so as I understand, the capital account is an account to hold all funds for the construction, so that's the funds from Long Ball, other participants, and the county, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so I thought I heard you say something different, that it
No,
was just gonna be.
he's just saying for that $100,000, I cannot have the money go into that construction account and then pull it back out. I have to, when I'm putting money in, I have to take 100,000 of what I would normally put in, but I have to put it into this legal account and not put it into the construction account.
Okay,
So
okay,
the-
got it,
The
got it,
8 million less the
Yeah.
100,000.
Yeah.
So the 100,000 goes.
got it. Thank you. So, are you open to other questions, or, like I say, I have not had a chance to review the whole document, but the one part of it that I am curious about is that the document basically designates you the sole authority to negotiate the lease that's not going to come back to the board for final approval.
I think there's a reference to Exhibit A, and more specifically, in looking at Exhibit A, you'll see we have specific timeframes and dollar amounts for when the funds would be contributed. We have more to work with for the first year worth of funding for funds needed in 2023 as we transition to 2024. What I'm anticipating is we will be successful with the GCCM. We will bring on our general contractor and the whole team, and the timeline might change in 2024. It's hard to know what that is right now because we have yet to have that team assembled. So the thought is that if there is a need to adjust the maybe the amount as far as what month it is, that date that it comes in, I would have the flexibility to work with Mr. Duff and do that. So if we need the funds sooner, then we could look at adjusting that. If we don't need them until, instead of June, maybe we don't need them until August, we would have the ability to adjust it. I think the intent is not to renegotiate the agreement per se, but to have the ability to amend this table if we find that it be helpful or necessary once we're up and running and underway.
So what I'm looking at is in the matter of the execution of an agreement between Spokane County and Mongol DBA, yada, 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 that's a resolution. And then you go to page 3. Now therefores, number 2, Jeff Chase, the Director of Spokane Parks and Recreation, or is this used authorized to negotiate and execute on behalf of the county and other than an open public meeting, any agreement, change order, any documents and stuff. So
I think that, in Casey can help me, because he did help. And I think that's more specific to facilitating the construction process and the various contracts and documents. But Casey, please help.
So the MOU that the board adopted this past week does contemplate a new lease being promulgated. That will be something that will require the board's approval. What's proposed in the resolution for this agreement is that Doug Chase will have the ability to modify as needed attachment A, or to execute any other change orders, et cetera, pertaining to this agreement as needed. And that's the authorization that he's asking the board for. Of course, if the board wants to stay more involved, we can also modify that.
Casey, that's not what the agreement says. It says in paragraph 3, or any other documents, including modifications, but it's not limited to that. It says any other document.
Are you looking at page 3 of the proposed agreement?
I'm looking
the shared
at
expense agreement?
I'm looking at page 3 of the resolution.
Okay, just a moment. Okay, is it possible to share it? Okay, here we go.
The fourth whereas.
Number 2.
See, it does say to the agreement attached here too, after Exhibit A. Let's see. To the agreement attached here too. So it says Doug Chase, Director of Spokane County Parks, Recreation, and Golf, for his designee is authorized to negotiate and execute on behalf of Spokane County, other than an open public meeting, any agreement, change order, or other document, including modifications to Exhibit A, to the agreement attached here too. So this is specific to the agreement which is going to be attached, which is the shared expense agreement. But of course, we can modify this if the board desires.
So is the shared agreement, expense agreement then coming to the board for final approval, or?
Yes, this agreement is, so we've negotiated the shared expense agreement. And this resolution is going to be to, for the board to ratify that agreement. The shared expense agreement.
Okay.
And the shared expense agreement was contemplated in the MOU that was signed by the board last week. The shared expense agreement was contemplated as well as the new lease document, and that was referenced in the MOU as well. The lease will be a separate, in the future, that'll be a separate item. So the way that this is written specifically in the resolution, section 2, is it's granting Doug Chase the ability to make any amendments necessary to fulfill the project in accordance with this agreement.
Okay, so if I hear you right, I haven't had a chance to go through it thoroughly, so I apologize if my understanding is incomplete right now. But so it's my understanding, based upon what you're saying, Casey, is that final lease document will come to the board for adoption, right? This is where
The
you said
lease-
yes, Casey.
The lease document, did you say lease document?
Yes.
So there isn't a lease document yet, that we've
I know
created.
that, but at some point there will be.
Yes.
Mhm.
Come before us.
Yeah, that would be.
Then that one will have to come before the board. Yeah.
I just wanted, all I'm trying to do is make sure that there's transparency around this. So, you know, those major documents like the lease agreement and stuff would come to the board. Some of the other minutia about how to execute change orders and stuff like that, we don't need to be involved in that. So if that's the goal, then fine. If that's not the goal, then let's talk.
The reason, so this resolution is going to be on top of the shared expense agreement, which we've drafted. And what essentially this clause is going to be able to enable Doug Chase to execute those minor agreements that are associated with this project and pursuant to the terms of the shared expense agreement. So, for example, you know, any contractors agreements or anything like that that would, and this is obviously, we also should include language that should say through the purchasing department. We've made a modification to this agreement or to this resolution proposal, and it should say Doug Chase, on behalf of Spokane County and through the purchasing department. So this is not the latest, this is not the resolution, the latest proposal, but it should say through the purchasing department on here. We'll be able to essentially effectuate the purpose of the shared expense agreement without having to come before the board for every change order, every time we sign a subcontract or anything like that.
Great. So are we taking action on this tomorrow then, or?
No, I think it's next
No, I think we're looking at
Okay.
And have more
next,
time to.
So there's more time to go through
next
it.
week's consent agenda.
Thank you. Apologize for, I didn't know whether we were trying to take action on it by tomorrow or not, so I was kind of panicking to try and catch up.
No,
And so-
but they're trying to brief today,
Yeah.
since it's gonna be next
Yeah.
week.
So one last question, if that's all right. Is Long Ball Inc. the corporate entity for the Spokane Indians that we know today?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know whether it was a new entity created to meet MLB's requirements or anything like that, so that's why I
That
was
was a good question.
curious.
It's been Long Ball Inc. since '85, to my knowledge. We just DBA Spokane Indians baseball.
Terrific, thank you.
That's when we did the prior contract.
Yeah,
Yeah, last 3 leases that I know
Yeah.
of. Okay. Long
Yeah.
Ball, yeah.
okay. I'm good, thank you. Thanks, yeah.
It is not on tomorrow's agenda.
Okay. I don't have the speed read, keep going. Well,
But I mean, the purpose of this is with the 8 million that we're committed.
got a structure.
Yeah, to provide that structure is to,
Yeah, establish the
Not being-
expectations.
and that way that-
Expectations both sides, so we both understand what the money can be used for. Right, it's clearly identified. And how that process is handled.
Right, and how we're gonna handle the process with going after the GCCM and all of that to.
Right.
Because this is gonna be a long-term
Several years.
project.
Yeah.
With having baseball happen during the middle of it.
So the committee, and we do not have a committee at the airport, so thank you for the question. It's forcing me to conjure up memory cells I thought had died. The 5-person committee will have 2 members for long ball. We'll have seats on there, so I'm assuming they can pick whoever they want to pick to be their representatives.
Yes, yeah, this
Okay.
is for the selection of the owners rep and the GCCM.
Right. So who are going to be our 3 reps?
Off the top of my head, I would say myself, I would expect to ask Kyle Tuig to serve. And then the third would either be Bruce Russell or Jamie Kelly of my department.
Okay.
With the county, and then I would anticipate Chris and whoever Chris brings, and that's the review committee that'll review the proposals for the owner's rep as well as the GCCM, should we be successful through the PRC process. Okay, thanks. And we did a very similar, really an identical format in the selection of our architects that seemed to work very well when we went through that process.
And will that be coming back? So whoever the committee decides, and I apologize, I haven't read it thoroughly, will that come back before the commissioners, or that will not come back before?
Again, I would look, I think as part of the purchasing process, it would be routine for some of those items to come back before the board. I would honestly have to check with purchasing. Some things they process administratively, other things, most seem to come back before the board. I honestly can't speak to that without inquiring of them.
I would, it's just assumption, which of course you don't like to use that word, that would be a big enough contract that it would need to come back before the board.
I would think they typically come before the board to be formally approved.
Yeah, so Casey, I guess we're not delegating that authority to have that would come back before the board, correct, for that contract?
We could add an additional piece to the agreement, which would say, which is to be approved by the Board of County Commissioners. If the board would like to, be involved in the process of who's on that committee, that's definitely something that we can contemplate.
I don't think we need to be on the committee. I think we just need to be.
You're just talking about the
contract that once.
Who's gonna represent us?
Yeah, I'm not worried about that. I guess I'm just making sure when we say Exhibit A and any changes or any of that to Exhibit A, that still the overall, who's ever chosen as the GCCM contractor, that would come before the Board of County Commissioners. And Scott, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, Commissioner, without a doubt, the GCCM contract, given the size of it, is absolutely going to come to you. It must come to you under our procurement responsibilities. And just because of the visibility of this project, we would bring back in front of you the recommendation of the GCCM contractor to let you know how the process went. I think that's just good transparency, good awareness for all of you. And then once the budget gets set and the contract gets done, then we'd be managing to that budget as the contract goes along. But all those initial steps will be absolutely in front of
you. And I would also add, for sure, we would put subject to the provisions of the County Code 104, which is the purchasing code. So this is subject to all the limits that are imposed according to the purchasing code. Purchases or procurement over 50,000 require board approval, et cetera. So.
Except we wouldn't be seeing all the subcontracts or any of that.
This would come
separately.
Yeah, this would come to the board through like the normal course of purchasing, doing what purchasing does.
Mr. French.
Yeah, so when we did the process for the airport, we did an interview for contractors that would serve as the GCCM. And then we selected one of those contractors, and then they went out and got the pricing for it to make sure that we could hit the budget. So are you going to do the same process here then?
That's my understanding of the GCCM, yes.
Okay.
That's part of it, and I believe with what we're looking at, the general contractor can do up to 30% of the work themselves, but it has to be bid. They will bid to the subcontractors, and it's part of that alternative delivery and part of the new procedure we're looking forward to becoming familiar with and having the right help on board to and we're optimistic it will have great results and potentially stretch the dollars that we're all investing and have fewer surprises along the way is what's been relayed to us by those that use it quite a bit.
So just an observation. So when we went through it for the airport, the committee that did the interview for the board was Max Cooney and Brian Biggs and myself, and then Larry Crowder. And the one thing that I thought was helpful was having Max, because he's been part of this process before. And so as you look to create this committee, maybe having somebody with that kind of experience on the committee with you, or even as an outside consultant to the group or whatever, would be helpful, because we've never done it before, and so we don't want to screw it up. So just offer that up for an observation. I think Max was very helpful for the committee's, the selection and what we were doing, because he's been familiar with that process.
I think that was a thought in having Kyle Tuig be part of that committee. He has a lot of experience with various alternative delivery.
Oh, he does, okay, but then satisfied.
But I would, obviously I would recuse myself from many of those
Yeah,
decisions,
yeah.
but I think Max provides a good perspective, because dealing with owners, AGC and the state on how these contracts come together, it's, and he's not competing. Like, I think on the airport, he was great because, it's not something he's doing, but he sees it from an owner perspective, a contractor perspective versus Kyle's looking at it from the owner's perspective. So it just gives you a little bit of a different angle to it, that you're seeing it from both sides. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I
if
think.
he's open to serving, we could certainly have him serve as our third member on that committee as well.
Well, I was suggesting Max, because firsthand knowledge with him at the airport. My point was, somebody with that experience is, I think, I found it to be helpful. So that's why I offer it up.
I'm sure he'd be
Oh, sure.
more than
Yeah,
happy. And-
I don't want to pre-committee.
Yeah, and I think having gone through it at the, just, at the airport, having done it, it just was, especially a much bigger project.
Yeah.
But I feel like from comments that I've heard from different people, not just you, that he provided a really good perspective.
Yeah.
I would even offer to, if one of the two Spokane Indians seats needed to go to someone with that ability, we would be more than open to bringing someone on as one of our seats too, because I don't know that we're going to bring someone to the table from our front office that's going to have that type of experience either. So if we get in a situation where we are looking for an extra seat, then I would keep that in mind as well, just as we're forming that committee.
Yeah, and so I don't want to push you away from having a seat to represent you. So it could even function as an outside consultant to the committee.
Sure.
And stuff would be another way to deal with that. That way you don't have to give up representation. Anyway, just an observation.
Scott's hand is raised. Scott?
Well, you've already kind of covered what I was going to suggest, and I think all the questions and comments were really spot on. When the city did this originally, when I was with the city, our first GCCM, we brought in a variety of folks outside of the city that helped to kind of inform on the process, that were a little bit more familiar with it, from designers to contractors, people who weren't going to bid on the work itself. So I think that's what we'd look at. Certainly Kyle being on it, he's done, I think, 5 or 6 alternative delivery projects already. And so I think he's valuable. Doug getting some good value being involved with this stuff and some good knowledge. And I think what Chris offered up for us to maybe look jointly at, do we get someone with GCCM experience that wouldn't be bidding on the contract, either designer or contractor, would be, I think, really valuable for us to have.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
So if there's any other, this is scheduled for the consent agenda for the 7th?
Yes,
Is that correct?
we are on track we'll make sure we have all the latest versions in with the adjustments as mentioned. And we are looking to have that before you on the 7th.
Okay, so any other questions or comments, make sure to get to them. And then if we need to discuss on the Monday before, we can. Oh, we'll be at our retreat, but
We'll be at the retreat.
But we can always, if we need to add anything to the agenda, we can. Because you guys are on a timeline to get to the.
Correct.
For construction schedule.
BRC application.
BRC,
yeah.
To get to them and then start going through your construction in the fall after the season.
Have you had an appointment with them yet?
We have not submitted the application deadline is April 20th.
Okay.
And then I believe it's about a month later, May 25th, is when they meet, and assuming our application is accepted, they will, is there anything I'm missing, Kyle? I'm looking at Kyle. This will be my first time, so I think we're on track.
Yeah, you'll be able to, you can drop your solicitation the next day.
And per the shared expense agreement,
In order to apply that, we have to have the attorney, I mean,
right,
there's different things.
we have to have the
in
owner's
place.
rep on board and the special outside legal counsel on board, so we are on a timeline that will allow us to do that. I think the solicitation for the owner's rep closes, I want to say in about a week, roughly, give or take, a few days. So we're on track, and we'll be back before you, as Scott mentioned, with that recommendation. After we go through that process to select, and we're shooting to have everybody in place on board in time to submit an application by the 20th of April, which will be very helpful to trying to maximize the limited construction window this year. And lead times and all that good stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, I know, Amber, you had a miscellaneous item.
Yes, I think this homeless agreement, I sent out the latest version that Jared had, oh, Jared's not here, but
It's the letter, it's not.
sorry, the letter. It's a joint letter, I guess, right?
Statement.
Joint statement, maybe that's the right letter. It's not an agreement, it's just a joint statement. It's the same one that we edited like a week and a half ago, so there's no changes. And I understand, I talked to Gavin Cooley, the city of Spokane may take action tonight, is on their agenda. And so we missed getting on our agenda. I would love if we could, if there's no other changes, maybe by leave tomorrow we can adopt it. I think the city of the Valley is kind of waiting on the county and city of Spokane, and they will take action tomorrow night. It's my understanding, but I don't have any other new information. I just reached out to Gavin to make sure there were no more edits that we were aware of. And he wasn't expecting any more from the city of Spokane or the mayor's office.
And you just sent it out this morning.
It's just the one that Jared had edited like a week and a half ago.
That included all of our comments.
Yes.
I think that the biggest differentiator on it, it now has 6 bullets rather than 4 on the second page, where it kind of
And I think we
what would
reworked,
be discussed
and I think
in
we
the due diligence
reworked that
period.
first italicized thing was kind of
Okay.
long-winded. I think it was just reworded.
Yeah, but you'll know you're looking at the most recent update because there are 6 items rather than 4 on the second page.
We added like
And then
talking about data and
and then discussing what kind of, how do you measure success? You know, what are the measurables that would be tracked to make sure that if there is an authority working, how do we actually know it's succeeding? So, which I think was an important bullet point to have there.
So are we, I mean, if we take it as by leave tomorrow, we're gonna have to discuss it and open it up for public comment. So, but to try to get the timeframe of the others, are you guys okay with taking this by leave?
I am. If the city doesn't act tonight, I think we should kind of pump the brakes, because we've heard for the last month that the city's gonna pass it tonight, and they haven't.
they haven't had their act together.
Well-
They gotta get their act together. I think because last Monday they didn't have a meeting was part of it, but
Well, have they even discussed it yet?
I think they discussed it on a study session, but then they didn't have a quorum. I think council member Wilkerson and Zapone were in Olympia that day.
Yeah.
So they really wanted to participate in voting on it, so they asked that it be on a regular session, not the study session. So
Okay.
that's what I heard.
So by leave tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So add that to by leave tomorrow.
And then last week we had, or the last couple of weeks, we talked about having 2 folks identified to just be in contact if there's any meetings amongst elected officials in the next 90 days. And, you know, I had volunteered to be one of those, and you had suggested Commissioner Kearns as maybe another person, and Commissioner Cuny, I know you've been working on it in the past. It doesn't, I mean, we're all gonna have to review anything that comes before. So, but just wanting to get head nods on, like if they wanna, if they wanna start having some Zoom meetings or something with the consultant to start talking about how we're gonna set up the discussions. Are you in favor of that?
Commissioner Kearns, if you wanna do that, then I think that would be great.
Okay, all right.
Well, and the only reason I suggested is because I'm gonna be respectful of your time, but also we're 30 days into a 90-day window.
Well, I think we're gonna start the clock once we actually approve it.
Yeah,
I think we're gonna restart the
What the
clock.
statement is what I think when the 90 days.
Okay.
Yeah, I
So
think
we
so.
still got another 30 days to go before we start the clock.
Hopefully not. I mean, I think everyone
I
wants to
think-
get, start seeing what this could look like, so.
I just wanna start hearing the discussion about the data system. That's why I guess there's the woman from Houston's being hired to be a consultant to give us lots of good technical information, but I think most of what the discussion will be, with the valley and the city is looking at different iterations of like a structure and what that might look like, and then bringing that back for full discussion. My concern was if they never touch base for 90 days, then you could bring back a regional structure that, the county hasn't had a chance to review or may not be in favor of. So having little touch points over the next 3 months is important.
And I think we talked about, when appropriate to have Gavin
Yes.
and Rick come back in.
They're more than willing to
talk
come
us too.
anytime.
So,
So you've had the opportunity to go to Houston and look at the program down there, and I'm assuming you met with the lady that's going to be serving as a consultant?
I can't remember her name now, I'm sorry.
begins with
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So would you? Oh, of course, sure you did. No, would
That is weird today.
would it be your advice to us? What would you suggest to us to get, because I don't know about Josh, but I know that all I've heard is secondhand information and stuff, so I don't know specifically what they did. And so is there any value to maybe, paying for a plane fare and having her come up and meet with the five of us, or meet with us and the city and the valley, or what? Because I don't know how they plan on using her as a consultant.
I think they are gonna have her come up here in person. She's
Okay.
not gonna
That
just
was my
be Zoom.
impression. Okay,
Yeah, so certainly, again, when she's up, I mean, that's where we could ask Gavin to have her come and meet
Right.
with us
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
During this 90-day period, to do that. We were down there for, really a long day. We went down the night before and left
Right.
the next day. So we were there for a long day. So we had a lot of different people coming in and out. She was one of them. She's been helping, I think in LA, somewhere in California. She's been helping other cities
okay.
and communities do this.
So what was your biggest takeaway?
There's no secret sauce.
Okay,
That it's really getting the groups to come together and look at it differently and realize that kind of how you structure it so everybody feels comfortable with the structure is going to be a big piece of it. I think they did a nonprofit down in Houston. Seattle's got an authority. I don't think my concerns are you need a nonprofit because if the business community is going to be contributing, you've got to have a nonprofit.
Right.
I still, which is questions I would have for her is how did they take the government dollars and feed it into the nonprofit and do that so that it was still accountable and looked at. So, but what they did do with the nonprofit, the provider community, is they brought everybody together and said, yeah, some of you are not gonna do the same thing. You're not gonna look the same today as you did yesterday.
Right.
But it was a very strong mayor form of government there. The mayor literally sets the agenda for the council. Nobody can add or delete. So it's a different form of government that allowed her the opportunity to say,
That's what we're gonna do.
this is what we're gonna do. This is how I'm gonna fund it. And if you don't wanna get on board, then you're not gonna get funding. I mean, so there was some of that occurred that we don't necessarily have that ability to be that strong about it. The fact that nonprofits, you know, or providers are already coming along and understand it and know it. I mean, I had a conversation with a couple here recently. They understand it and know that, but they're okay with that because they're like, you know, Catholic Charities may do something else better than what VOA does.
Right.
And vice versa. So I think they're all willing to look at that because we're too siloed here.
Right.
And so we've got to do something. You know, and so what that is, you know, but I keep saying we have to figure out the financial side of it because we don't have more money to put into it. And so we've got to figure out what that funding mechanism is. Gavin, and talking to him, thinks there's additional funding opportunities from different grants and stuff, but I think we're gonna see as we come out of COVID and that all these opportunities that we've had in the past, like 3 years, aren't gonna be there. I mean, it's gonna be, I think we're gonna struggle
Start drying up.
as our own budget, let alone, you know, how else we do it. So I mean, I have a lot of questions. Do I think doing something that we do it together is gonna be better? I think, you know, we probably see, you know, would there be any, I don't think there's any impact to our staff, but City of Spokane could have impact to their staff where, just like with Shrek, you could end up with, it's a different entity, and so people could choose to move to that different entity, but they may not be staying at the city. You know, there's just all kinds of questions.
So what kind of feedback are you hearing about the Seattle Homeless Authority that they created?
Well, they've been through 4 iterations.
Yeah.
And the fact that they want billions of dollars now, you know, it's like, we have to look upstream. We've got to start looking at what's upstream to stop it. We can't just keep spending on the downstream side. And so, you know, I look at, you know, fentanyl. I mean, we look at, you know, years ago, it was alcoholism. I mean, we've always had homeless, I mean, from biblical times. I mean, it's just, we're never gonna end it. I mean, I just have to say, we're never gonna end it. How do we handle it compassionately and help people? And, you know, you look at, you know, in the 40s and 50s when it was the soup kitchens and the people that were alcoholics, you know, drinking out of a bag is the stereotype. You know, but it's changed when the opioid crisis happened. I mean, the whole drug situation has changed. So I have, you know, questions on how do we look at that upstream side? What are the potential funding for that?
Right, behavioral health, substance treatment, the opioid money, settlement money, all those things.
How do you get drug dealers off the street so they're not dealing drugs to our youth? You know, and what is that long-term implication brain-wise? And I don't know what the research yet. I'm asking those questions on what's the long-term brain activity of people that are on fentanyl now that fentanyl is so prominent. And, you know, what does that mean versus, you know, as we know from marijuana today. So, I mean, I have a ton of questions.
Yeah. Well, and I see some reports that talk about, you know, not only the drug addiction and the alcohol addiction, but the side effects of COVID and how that's affecting a lot of people now moving forward too and stuff. So that's a problem as well. Yeah, I changed it to 1 o'clock. Yeah, but when I talked to some of the commissioners on the other side of the state about the Seattle model, I mean, the recurring theme is it's a dark hole we spend money in and we've not seen any results. And, you know, I know you don't want that to happen here. I don't, none of us do. And so I'm just trying to learn, you know, okay, what did they do and why are they in this hole? Because you're right, they're talking about billions of dollars now to address the problem, and there's not billions of dollars to be found even in Seattle and King County.
No, I mean, 8 billion is what they want for capital,
Yeah,
and then 3.5 billion a year to operate it, and that's just not sustainable.
it's not sustainable.
Well, and I think,
And
yeah,
we've seen it's not sustainable for the capital that we have here. So, but we know that there's, needs, so what's the housing
well, and that's why
side?
getting, like, at least if we can get the 3 large jurisdictions started, and hopefully we'll have other smaller jurisdictions get involved, but like, we all do have a pool of money and or a source of funds.
Right.
So if we're willing to pool it, what are those actual measures of success that we can report back out to the community,
And in the past.
Sounds like the mayor of Houston had a lot of control, but if the 3 jurisdictions here do decide to do something together, we do control those dollars that come through HUD as well as other sources, so anyway.
And traditionally, we've always put, at the county, we've put those housing, or those homeless dollars to the city of Spokane. So that way, we weren't doing 2 separate things with it, and we weren't taking admin costs out of it, to
Right,
make less,
right.
even down to.
But now we have we have those other state funds that we just looked at last week, and there's that we approved.
You mean REIT dollars? Is that what you mean?
No, it was the
Yeah.
state housing dollars that are collected through, I thought it was
Oh,
a
document recording fees.
Oh,
Yeah,
document recording fees.
So there's
yeah.
different streams.
Right.
And so I think I'll be interested to see once somebody looks through all of those and looks at, how we could manage those better.
But to that point, I mean, that's something we need to be careful of, is are we currently spending those dollars on a program that we are seeing success on? I mean, do we wanna take those from something from like Jason's department, who was just in here, I mean, taking those, or Justin, I'm sorry, taking those from Justin's department and sending those to this, I mean, then how does Justin fill that, or how does he fill that gap, or does he just then direct those individuals that now you have to go see this organization and not us? So I mean, these are all going to be a part of the
It's all part
sort of the discussion.
Yeah, because.
Well, I mean, the
because
same
those-
organizations are going to us and the city of Spokane and different funders, nonprofit. They're going to all the same places to get enough money to actually, do a service. But I think in Houston, they found that sometimes there was duplication, right, of efforts, but it's not perfect. Even if we get rid of duplication, there's still going to be a gap of funding. So, but I'm hoping that's what this process over 90 days will look at, actual dollars and cents, all the different funding streams, how we are currently allocating them, how we might do it differently, and then, how does that decision-making process go, right?
And they had I think it was a retired CEO that the community really respected, that then came in to run it. So I mean,
It's like the director, right?
So again, it was trying to, it was providing that sense of confidence to the electeds and the others, that there's somebody who, can do that. So no, yeah, it'll be interesting what the 90 days brings, and like I said, I know Pierce County has been looking at this too for over a year as to how to do it and bring it together. Because it is, we've seen it on everything we've done, if we can do it collectively, it's gonna be done better than the siloed approach. But the other thing that I would say too is between all the different jurisdictions, there's different ordinances, and those ordinances would have to look at what coming together to a mutual agreement on that too.
Like at the city, we had the Human Services General Fund pot of money that did some of it go into homeless prevention or.
Yeah, but even more
reduction.
recently, if there's a homeless bed, you can't reduce the number of homeless beds within the city of Spokane, the number. And we would,
Yes.
so those are the kind of ordinances that the
Yes.
other entities don't have, that we would have to look at, how do you make that so everybody's comfortable?
Well, the other part of it that's interesting, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, I apologize for that.
You're the one who needs to get going.
Yeah, but, so But Seattle now has also reintroduced their no sit and lie and their anti-camping ordinance too and stuff. So they're now starting to put brackets around the uses of public spaces that they've never done before. And so
And that's with the help of Ann Davidson, who's the new city attorney over there. I mean, she's been instrumental in some of that. And that is part of what Houston did. I mean, the mayor was like, no, we're not gonna have, the public space is public space. It's not, just for homeless and, people to camp on the sidewalks and make people go around. And when you're trying to do commerce, go between businesses. I mean, she definitely, that was one of the things she was. When I was just back in DC, there was an encampment right by our hotel that had 50 people in a little park, and you saw the signs go up, and the mayor cleared it the Monday we were there. And so I mean, it's happening, and I don't know what their space availability was or any of that, but I think, the reports back then were like, similar to Camp Hope at the time, where like we've got 50 people who are now, the crime in that area had gone way up, and it was just like, we can't have that happen, so.
All things to
Yes,
be
all things-
discussed.
yeah.
All right. Okay, well, thanks. I will just, maybe Gina, you could work with Jared just to clean up the final copy, make sure it, and we'll get a report to make sure the city passes their
So Jared,
statement.
yeah, Jared, if you kind of pay attention too, and then we'll take a 5
There,
minute tomorrow.
make sure we pass the same version.
And then, then the trick will be to make sure that the valley passes
Well,
our version.
We'll do our two, and then hopefully
We'll do
they'll.
our part, yeah. I'll just follow it and coordinate with Gavin along the way in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Just a heads up, so Ron and I have been in an email chain with several of the other departments here at the county. There's a teacher that's bringing, I guess they're gonna start at City Hall tomorrow around noon, gonna talk with some of the administration, business and departments. They're gonna come over here because I think they're gonna tour the clerk's office, maybe the assessor's office, and they're gonna sit in on our 2 o'clock consent agenda. So there could be a crowd of students there. So if you wanna talk to them when we're done, just a heads up, there'll be a class there.
School.
Do you know the school? I don't. I don't know. It was the some of the staff over at the city was organizing it, so I don't know what school they're coming from now.
Okay, because I know it's Natalie Paulson.
Yeah,
the teacher,
yeah,
correct?
but I don't know what school that is.
What's the name of the teacher? I can look it up.
Natalie Paulson.
So at 2 o'clock, there will be at our consent agenda. There'll be a group.
Great.
Grab. So.
At least encourage people to.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we are now